The angels sped up, their excitement palpable as the landscape beneath them transformed from towering mountains to rolling hills, farmland, and the blur of highways and towns. The thrill of the journey seemed to heighten everyone's mood in different ways. Grover passed the time by playing his pipes, the soft melody occasionally drowned out by the rush of wind. Zoe, clearly bored, entertained herself by shooting arrows at billboards as they zoomed past. Every time a Target store appeared, and there were plenty, she couldn't resist landing a few bullseyes on the store's logo at speeds of 100 miles per hour. Talia, however, kept her eyes tightly shut, muttering under her breath as if in prayer. Meanwhile, Bianca clung to Draco tightly, her fear of falling making her grip firm, though her trust in Draco kept her from panicking. "Where do you guys want to land?" Hank finally asked as they approached their destination. The Angels' swift flight had brought them to San Francisco. Draco couldn't help but marvel at the city. It was beautiful, like a smaller, cleaner Manhattan surrounded by lush green hills and the veil of morning fog. The expansive bay shimmered under the rising sun, dotted with islands, sailboats, and ships. The Golden Gate Bridge peeked through the mist, a majestic sentinel of the city. For a brief moment, Draco wished he had a camera. There, Zoe pointed to a distinct building near the waterfront. "The Embarcadero." "Good choice," Chuck agreed. "Hank and I can blend in with the pigeons." The group stared at him. "Kidding," Chuck said, throwing his hands up. "Sheesh, can't statues have a sense of humor?" Their landing was early enough in the morning that they barely attracted attention, save for one startled homeless man at the ferry dock who screamed about metal angels from Mars before running off in terror. After saying their goodbyes to Hank and Chuck, who flew off to party with their statue friends, the group found themselves standing awkwardly on the dock. Reality set in quickly. They had made it to the West Coast, but now what? Artemis was here somewhere, and Annabeth too. But they had no leads, and the winter solstice loomed tomorrow. Worse, the monster Artemis had been hunting was supposed to find them during the quest. So far, nothing. After a brief discussion, they agreed they needed answers. "But how do we figure out what this monster is?" Percy asked, frustrated. "Nereus," Draco said. Percy blinked. "Oh, Nereus. Apollo mentioned him when I talked to him briefly. The old man of the sea might know what we're dealing with. The question is, how do we find him?" Zoe frowned. "Old Nereus, huh? You know him?" Talia asked. "My mother was a sea goddess," Zoe replied. "Of course I know him. Unfortunately, he's not easy to find. Just follow the smell." "Smell?" Draco raised an eyebrow. "Come," Zoe said with a sigh. "I will show thee." 5 minutes later, Draco stood at the docks, outfitted in a mismatched ensemble Zoe had scrounged together. He wore an oversized flannel shirt, baggy jeans, bright red sneakers, and a floppy rainbow hat. "Oh yeah," Grover said, stifling laughter. "Totally inconspicuous." Zoe nodded in approval. "A typical male vagrant." "Thanks," Draco grumbled, tugging at the hat. "Why am I doing this?" "To blend in," Zoe said simply. "Now, act the part." Draco muttered under his breath, but complied. They began scouring the docks, Zoe leading them to a cluster of homeless people gathered in blankets, waiting for the nearby soup kitchen to open. "He's down there somewhere," Zoe said. "He never strays far from the water. You'll know him when you find him. He smells different." "Great," Draco muttered. "And once I find him, grab him," Zoe instructed. "He'll try to escape, but don't let go. Force him to answer your question." "Got it?" Draco shuffled toward the group, activating his stealth. He stumbled as if on the verge of collapse, passing the homeless man who had witnessed their earlier arrival. The man was still ranting about metal angels from Mars, but he wasn't who Draco was searching for. Using his enhanced senses, Draco scanned the group, his inspect status ability working in the background. Most of the men were just ordinary mortals, until Draco's gaze landed on an old man sprawled in a patch of sunlight at the end of the pier. The man looked ancient, with a scraggly white beard stained yellow, wearing pajamas and a fuzzy bathrobe that had seen better days. He reeked of the sea, hot seaweed, brine, and dead fish. The stench made Draco recoil slightly, but he was certain this was the one. Draco approached cautiously. The old man cracked one eye open as if sensing his presence, but quickly shut it again, pretending to sleep. Without hesitation, Draco lunged. Ah! Nereus screamed as Draco grabbed him. Help! Someone help me! That's a crime! One of the other homeless men shouted. You can't just mug an old man! Draco snarled, releasing a hint of his aura. The men scattered in terror, leaving him alone with Nereus. I don't want your money, Draco said coolly. Just answers. Nereus squirmed, his rotten fish stench making Draco's task even more unpleasant. Heroes, always picking on me. Why don't you bother someone else? Because you know everything, Draco shot back. The others caught up just as Nereus groaned in defeat. An audience for my humiliation, Nereus grumbled. Fine, one question. That's the rule. Draco hesitated, weighing their needs. Artemis, Annabeth, and the monster. How could he ask all that in one question? Finally, he decided, all right, Nereus, tell me where to find the monster that could bring the end of the gods. The one Artemis was hunting. Nereus grinned, his mossy green teeth making the sight unpleasant. Oh, that's easy. He's right there. He pointed at the water. What? Draco leaned forward, confused. The deal is complete. Nereus crowed before transforming into a goldfish and flipping into the sea. Wait! Draco shouted, furious. Moo! Draco turned to the water and froze. A massive cow, serpent swam lazily next to the dock. Ah, Bessie, Percy groaned. Not now. Moo! Grover's eyes widened. He says his name isn't Bessie. It's the Ophiutorus. Ophia what? Talia asked. It means serpent bull, Grover explained. But why is it here? Draco's unease deepened. The situation was far more dangerous than he had imagined. Moo! Grover translated, his voice filled with urgency. He says Percy is his protector, and he's running from the bad people. He says they're close. Draco raised an eyebrow, wondering how Grover managed to extract all that meaning from a single low. Wait, Zoe interjected, her gaze fixed on Percy. You know this cow? Is the cow important? Bianca asked hesitantly. Percy quickly recounted how he had saved the creature in the past. Chapter 186. Talia groaned, shaking her head. And you just forgot to mention this before? Well, yeah, Percy admitted sheepishly. I'm a fool, Zoe muttered suddenly, her voice tinged with realization. I know this story. What story? Percy asked, bewildered. A tale from the War of the Titans, Zoe explained, her tone grave. My father told me this tale thousands of years ago. This is the beast we are looking for. Bessie. Percy glanced down at the Ophiutorus swimming near the dock. But he's too cute. He couldn't destroy the world. That is how we were wrong, Zoe said, shaking her head. We have been expecting a massive, ferocious monster. But the Ophiutorus doesn't destroy the gods directly. It must be sacrificed. Bessie lowed mournfully. I don't think he likes that word, Grover noted, patting Bessie's head soothingly. How could anyone hurt him? Draco said, his expression hardening. He's harmless? Zoe nodded. But there is power in killing innocents. Terrible power. The fates foretold a prophecy eons ago when this creature was born. Whoever kills the Ophiutorus and sacrifices its entrails to fire would gain the power to overthrow the gods. Maybe let's not talk about entrails either, Grover suggested nervously. Talia knelt by the dock, reaching out her hand. The Ophiutorus swam over to her, pressing its head against her palm. We have to protect him, Percy said firmly. If Luke gets hold of him. Luke wouldn't hesitate, Talia muttered, her eyes distant. The power to overthrow Olympus, that's huge. Yes, it is, my dear, a voice interrupted, thick with a French accent. And it is a power you shall unleash. The Ophiutorus whimpered and dove beneath the water as a figure stepped forward. Dr. Thorne, the manticore, stood before them, his mismatched eyes gleaming with malice. This is just perfect, the manticore gloated, his voice dripping with arrogance. He wore a tattered trench coat over his old Westover Hall uniform, now stained and frayed. His hair was unkempt and spiky, his silver stubble giving him a ragged, feral appearance. Long ago, the gods banished me to Persia, Thorne began, pacing dramatically. Forced me to live like a scavenger, devouring pathetic human farmers for survival. But now, the Titans shall honor me, and I shall feast on the flesh of half-bloods. 2 mortal mercenaries flanked him, guns ready. Another pair stood on the next dock, cutting off escape routes. Tourists wandered nearby, oblivious to the tension, but Draco knew the Manticore wouldn't hesitate to act. "Where are the skeletons?" Percy asked, trying to stall. Thorne sneered. "I do not need those foolish undead. The general thinks I am worthless. He will see when I destroy you myself." Zoe drew an arrow and aimed at Thorne's head, but Percy stopped her. "Zoe, don't!" The Manticore grinned wickedly. "Yes, listen to the boy. It would be a shame to kill you before you witness Talia's triumph." "What are you talking about?" Talia demanded, her shield and spear ready. "This is your destiny," Thorne declared, his voice almost reverent. "This is why Lord Kronos brought you back. You will sacrifice the Ophiutorus, gain ultimate power, and overthrow Olympus on your 16th birthday." "Shut up," Talia hissed, her voice cold and final. A silence fell, broken only by the soft lapping of the waves. Then, in a flash, Thorne's expression shifted to panic as he felt cold steel press against his throat. "You talk too much," Draco's voice came from behind him, low and deadly. "And now, your men are all dead." Draco had used his stealth to remain unnoticed, even by his own group. Only Zoe had realized he'd disappeared, keeping quiet because she trusted his plan. Thorne's face turned pale as he understood his failure. The mercenaries lay lifeless, taken out before they could act. "Percy," Draco said calmly, "call your father. Grover, guide the Ophiutorus to safety. Get it to Long Island." Grover nodded, his expression resolute. "The blessing of the wild should help us. Percy, pray to your dad." "Dad," Percy said, closing his eyes. "Help us. Keep Grover and the Ophiutorus safe at sea." "A prayer like that needs a sacrifice," Talia pointed out. Draco stepped forward and removed the Nemean lion pelt from his shoulders. "Take this," he said, handing it to Percy. "Why?" Percy asked, confused. "I don't need it," Draco said. "I'm not Hercules. I'll conquer the world on my own terms." As the golden pelt touched the water, it shimmered and dissolved into the sunlight. A strong sea breeze picked up, signaling Poseidon's favor. "Let's go," Grover said, jumping into the water. Bessie swam beside him, letting Grover cling to his neck. "Mo!" With that, the two disappeared beneath the waves, heading towards safety. Draco turned to the Manticore, his blade still pressed against Thorne's throat. "What about him?" Bianca asked. "He's useless now," Draco replied. "Zoe knows where we need to go." All eyes turned to Zoe, who pointed across the bay. Beyond the Golden Gate Bridge, a lone mountain rose above the fog. "The garden of my sisters," she said quietly. "I must go home." Draco nodded. "And as for you," he said to Thorne, his voice cold. The Manticore's eyes widened in terror, but Draco didn't hesitate. His blade struck true, ending Thorne's life in an instant. 910 experience points have been obtained. Because of the effects of Tidal Skill Walking Egg, another 910 experience points were obtained. The level of Nephilim Dragon has increased from 106 to 107.
Hey everyone, Quantum Audiobook here. Sorry for interrupting, but if you're enjoying this content, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your thoughts on this novel in the comments, and don't forget to like the video.
"We will never make it," Zoe said. "We're moving too slow." "I don't get it," Percy said. "Why do we have to get there at sunset?" "The Hesperides are the nymphs of the sunset," Zoe said. "We can only enter their garden as day changes to night. What happens if we miss it? Tomorrow is the winter solstice. If we miss sunset tonight, we would have to wait until tomorrow evening. And by then, the Olympian Council will be over. We must free Lady Artemis tonight." "We need a car," Talia said. "Talia's right," Draco said. "Golden Drive is not enough to carry the 5 of us. We need a car." but there's nobody to help us here. Unless we, borrowed one. Wait, Talia said. She started rifling through her backpack. There is somebody in San Francisco who can help us. I've got the address here somewhere. Who? Draco asked. Talia pulled out a crumpled piece of notebook paper and held it up. Professor Chase. Annabeth's dad. Annabeth's dad wasn't what you expect of a normal father. Well, no ordinary human would manage to get Athena's attention. He was wearing an old-fashioned aviator's cap and goggles. He looked so weird, with his eyes bugging out through the glasses, that Percy and Bianca took a step back on the front porch. "Hello," he said in a friendly voice. "Are you delivering my airplanes?" They looked at each other warily. No, sir," Percy said. "Drat," he said. "I need 3 more sop with camels." "Right," Draco said. "We're friends of Annabeth." "Annabeth." He straightened as if I'd just given an electric shock. "Is she all right? Has something happened?" None of them answered, but most of their faces, Draco just showed a poker face, must have told him that something was very wrong. He took off his cap and goggles. He had sandy-colored hair, like Annabeth, and intense brown eyes. He was rather handsome, but it looked like he hadn't shaved in a couple of days, and his shirt was buttoned wrong, so one side of his collar stuck up higher than the other side. "You'd better come in," he said. It didn't look like a house they'd just moved into. There were Lego robots on the stairs and 2 cats sleeping on the sofa in the living room. The coffee table was stacked with magazines, and a little kid's winter coat was spread on the floor. The whole house smelled like fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies. There was jazz music coming from the kitchen. It seemed like a messy, happy kind of home, the kind of place that had been lived in forever. "Dad," a little boy screamed. "He's taking apart my robots." "Bobby," Dr. Chase called absently. "Don't take apart your brother's robots." "I'm Bobby," the little boy protested. "He's Matthew." "Matthew," Dr. Chase called. "Don't take apart your brother's robots." "Okay, Dad." Dr. Chase turned to us. "We'll go upstairs to my study." "This way." "Honey," a woman called. Annabeth's stepmom appeared in the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was a pretty Asian woman with red, highlighted hair tied in a bun. "Who are our guests?" she asked. "Oh," Dr. Chase said. "This is—" He stared at them blankly. "Frederick," she chided. "You forgot to ask them their names." They introduced themselves a little uneasily, but Mrs. Chase seemed really nice. She asked if they were hungry. They admitted they were, and she told them she'd bring them some cookies and sandwiches and sodas. "Dear," Dr. Chase said. They came about Annabeth. Mrs. Chase pursed her lips and looked concerned. "All right, go on up to the study, and I'll bring you some food." She smiled at Percy. "Nice meeting you, Percy. I've heard a lot about you." Upstairs, they walked into Dr. Chase's study, and Percy said, "Whoa." The room was wall-to-wall books, but what really caught Draco's attention were the war toys. There was a huge table with miniature tanks and soldiers fighting along a blue-painted river, with hills and fake trees and stuff. Old-fashioned biplanes hung on strings from the ceiling, tilted at crazy angles like they were in the middle of a dogfight. Dr. Chase smiled. "Yes, the Third Battle of Ypres. I'm writing a paper, you see, on the use of sop with camels to strafe enemy lines. I believe they played a much greater role than they've been given credit for." He plucked a biplane from its string and swept it across the battlefield, making aeroplane engine noises as he knocked down little German soldiers. "All right," Percy said. Zoe came over and studied the battlefield. The German lines were farther from the river. Dr. Chase stared at her. "How do you know that?" "I was there," she said matter-of-factly. "Artemis wanted to show us how horrible war was, the way mortal men fight each other. And how foolish, too. The battle was a complete waste." Dr. Chase opened his mouth in shock. "You?" "She's a hunter, sir," Talia said. "But that's not why we're here. We need—" "You saw the sop with camels?" Dr. Chase said. "How many were there? What formations did they fly?" "Sir," Talia broke in again. "Annabeth is in danger." That got his attention. He set the biplane down. "Of course," he said. "Tell me everything." It wasn't easy, but they tried. Meanwhile, the afternoon light was fading outside. They were running out of time. When they'd finished, Dr. Chase collapsed in his leather recliner. He laced his hands. "My poor brave Annabeth. We must hurry. Sir, we need transportation to Mount Tamalpais, Zoe said. And we need it immediately. I'll drive you. It would be faster to fly in my camel, but it only seats two. Whoa, you have an actual biplane? Percy said. Down at Crissy Field, Dr. Chase said proudly. That's the reason I had to move here. My sponsor is a private collector with some of the finest World War I relics in the world. He let me restore the Sopwith camel. Sir, Talia said, just a car would be great. And it might be better if we went without you. It's too dangerous. Dr. Chase frowned uncomfortably. Now wait a minute, young lady. Annabeth is my daughter. Dangerous or not, I can't just... Snacks, Mrs. Chase announced. She pushed through the door with a tray full of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and Cokes and cookies fresh out of the oven, the chocolate chips still gooey. Talia and I inhaled a few cookies while Zoe said, I can drive, sir. I'm not as young as I look. I promise not to destroy your car. Mrs. Chase knit her eyebrows. What's this about? Annabeth is in danger, Dr. Chase said. On Mount Tam, I would drive them, but apparently it's no place for mortals. It sounded like it was really hard for him to get that last part out. Mrs. Chase just nodded. Then they'd better get going. Right? Dr. Chase jumped up and started patting his pockets. My keys. His wife sighed. Frederick, honestly, you'd lose your head if it weren't inside your aviator hat. The keys are hanging on the peg by the front door. Right, Dr. Chase said. Draco grabbed a sandwich, like he wasn't going to eat something. Thank you both. We should go. Now. They hustled out the door and down the stairs, the Chases right behind them. Percy, Mrs. Chase called as they were leaving. Tell Annabeth. Tell her she still has a home here. Will you? Remind her of that. I'll tell her, Percy promised. They ran out to the yellow VW convertible parked in the driveway. The sun was going down. Draco figured they had less than an hour to save Artemis. Can't this thing go any faster? Talia demanded. Zoe glared at her. I cannot control the traffic. You both sound like my mother, Percy said. Shut up, they said in unison. Behind them, Draco and Bianca were amused by their coordination. Zoe weaved in and out of traffic on the Golden Gate Bridge. The sun was sinking on the horizon when they finally got into Marin County and exited the highway. The roads were insanely narrow, winding through forests and up the sides of hills and around the edges of steep ravines. Zoe didn't slow down at all. Why does everything smell like cough drops? Percy asked. Eucalyptus? Zoe pointed to the huge trees all around them. The stuff koala bears eat? And monsters, she said. They love chewing the leaves, especially dragons. Everyone looked at Draco. Dragons chew eucalyptus leaves? Bianca asked him directly. Maybe, Draco said unsurely. I'm not going to chew them, though. Well, you are the first dragon with human form that I have seen, so you could be an exception, Zoe said. But believe me, if you had to be in your dragon form all time, you would chew eucalyptus too. So that's the Mountain of Despair? Draco asked. Yes, Zoe said tightly. Why do they call it that? She was silent for almost a mile before answering. After the war between the Titans and the gods, many of the Titans were punished and imprisoned. Kronos was sliced to pieces and thrown into Tartarus. Kronos' right-hand man, the general of his forces, was imprisoned up there on the summit just beyond the Garden of the Hesperides. The general, Percy said. Clouds seemed to be swirling around its peak, as though the mountain was drawing them in, spinning them like a top. What's going on up there? A storm? Zoe didn't answer. Draco got a feeling she knew what the clouds meant, and she didn't like it. Draco's thoughts were precisely on the general. He knew already who he was, and the problem was how were they going to fight him. We have to concentrate, Talia said. The mist is really strong here, Dot. As a monster of the higher caliber, a dragon, Draco didn't have any problem with the mist. He was completely unaffected by it. The magical kind or the natural kind? Percy asked. Both. The gray clouds swirled even thicker over the mountain, and they kept driving straight toward them. They were out of the forest now, into wide, open spaces of cliff, grass, rocks, and fog. Draco senses something down at the ocean as they passed the scenic curve. Hey, there's a boat there, he said. A big white ship. They all looked where Draco was signaling. Both Percy and Talia opened their eyes wide. "Luke's ship?" Percy shouted. The Princess Andromeda, Luke's demon cruise ship, was docked at that beach. That's why he'd sent his ship all the way down to the Panama Canal. It was the only way to sail it from the East Coast to California. "We will have company then," Zoe said grimly. "Kronos' army." Suddenly, Draco sensed that something was wrong and shouted, "Stop the car!" Without question, Zoe slammed on the brakes. The yellow VW spun twice before coming to a stop at the edge of the cliff. "Out!" Talia opened the door and pushed Percy out. They both rolled onto the pavement. Draco grabbed Bianca and did the same, protecting her from a sure death. Lighting flashed, and Dr. Chase's Volkswagen erupted like a canary yellow grenade. When they opened their eyes, they were surrounded by wreckage. Part of the VW's fender had impaled itself in the street. The smoking hood was spinning in circles. Pieces of yellow metal were strewn across the road. Draco swallowed the taste of smoke out of his mouth and looked at Bianca. "Are you okay?" The girl looked shocked. She got barely alive out of that explosion. "Yeah." Draco hadn't seen such a powerful lighting since the use of his noble phantasm golden drive. That was an attack that was aiming for their lives. Draco searched for the rest of the group. It seemed that all of them were alive. Good thing. "One shall perish by a parent's hand," she muttered. "Curse him. He would destroy me?" "Me?" I took Draco a second to realize she was talking about her dad. But he had more important things to pay attention to right now. "Oh, hey, that couldn't have been Zeus's lightning bolt." "No way," Percy said. "Whose then?" Talia demanded. "I don't know." Zoe said Kronos' name. "Maybe he—" Talia shook her head, looking angry and stunned. "No, that wasn't it." "Wait," Percy said. "Where's Zoe?" Zoe. Percy, Talia, and Bianca didn't know where she was. "Zoe!" Bianca shouted. Then she appeared between them, pulling Bianca by her arm. "Silence, fools. Do you want to wake Ladon?" "You mean we're here?" "Very close," she said. "Follow me." Sheets of fog were drifting right across the road. Zoe stepped into one of them, and when the fog passed, she was no longer there. "Concentrate on Zoe," Draco said. "Follow her. She knows where she's going." When the fog cleared, they were still on the side of the mountain, but the road was dirt. The grass was thicker. The sunset made a blood-red slash across the sea. The summit of the mountain seemed closer now, swirling with storm clouds and raw power. There was only one path to the top, directly in front of them, and it led through a lush meadow of shadows and flowers. The Garden of Twilight, just like Draco had seen in his dream. But there was where Draco found what he didn't want to find: the dragon. In the original DxD, the novels that Draco had read, Ladon was killed by Heracles on his 11th quest. But Draco also knew the history of how Heracles received the apples, and he never fought Ladon. Since he was now on the DxD world, Ladon should be dead. It was Rise-of-Him, the one who resurrected him using Valerie's powers. So why? Why was the insomniac dragon in front of them right now? If it hadn't been for the enormous dragon, the garden would have been the most beautiful place Draco had ever seen. The grass shimmered with silvery evening light, and the flowers were such brilliant colors they almost glowed in the dark. Stepping stones of polished black marble led around either side of a 5-story tall apple tree, every bough glittering with golden apples, and not yellow golden apples like in the grocery store. Real golden apples. The apples of immortality, Talia said. Hera's wedding gift from Zeus. Draco wanted to step right up and pluck one, except for the dragon coiled around the tree. Now, it wasn't really a dragon like Draco. It wasn't as scary. The serpent's body was as thick as a booster rocket, glinting with coppery scales. He had more heads than anyone could count, as if 100 deadly pythons had been fused together. He appeared to be asleep. The heads lay curled in a big spaghetti-like mound on the grass. All the eyes closed. Then, the shadows in front of them began to move. There was a beautiful, eerie singing, like voices from the bottom of a well. Percy reached for Riptide, but Zoe stopped his hand. For figures shimmered into existence, for young women who looked very much like Zoe. They all wore white Greek chitons. Their skin was like caramel. Silky black hair tumbled loose around their shoulders. They were really beautiful, like her sister Zoe. They looked just like Zoe, gorgeous and probably very dangerous. Sisters, Zoe said. We do not see any sister, one of the girls said coldly. We see a half-blood and 3 hunters, all of whom shall soon die. You've got it wrong. It was Percy who stepped forward. Nobody is going to die. The girls studied him. They had eyes like volcanic rock, glassy and completely black. Perseus Jackson, one of them said. Yes, mused another. I do not see why he is a threat. Who said I was a threat? The first Hesperid glanced behind her, toward the top of the mountain. They fear thee. They are unhappy that this one has not yet killed thee. She pointed at Talia. Tempting sometimes, Talia admitted. But no thanks. He's my friend. There are no friends here, daughter of Zeus, the girl said. Only enemies. Go back. Not without Annabeth, Talia said. And Artemis, Zoe said. We must approach the mountain. You know he will kill thee, the girl said. You are no match for him. Artemis must be freed, Zoe insisted. Let us pass. The girl shook her head. You have no rights here anymore. We have only to raise our voices, and Ladon will wake. He will not hurt me, Zoe said. No. And what about thy so-called friends? There is no problem. I will take care of Ladon, Draco said. Wait. You can't. Zoe said. Remember the prophecy. The hunter is right. You can't take down Ladon, the eldest Hesperid said. Not even the gods dare to fight against him. Yeah, Draco knew that. Ladon is one of the evil dragons *, dragons that are known to be more powerful than the great dragon kings. He shouldn't be alive, not with Valerie at Draco's home. Draco has already received his fate point. So, why is he here? Receiving a fate point doesn't mean that he is not going to resurrect. Yeah, there are other means to resurrect a dragon. For example, Odin resurrected Fafnir after he was slayed by Siegfried. So, maybe, the Greek gods had resurrected Ladon after he was slayed to continue his task of protecting the apple tree. Draco saving Valerie had made a butterfly effect, altering the past of this world. Maybe Ladon is not an evil dragon anymore, but Draco was confident that he had the strength of one. Draco noticed Bianca holding of his sleeve. Don't fight him. I don't want you to die. Whoa, you guys look like I have any chances to win against this dragon. The prophecy said that one dragon was going to kill another one, not that Ladon was going to kill me, Draco said, amused by the looks of his companions. They all know how prophecies work, so that was the reason why they didn't have much faith in Draco's survival. Not only that, as Ladon was one of the infamous evil dragons, even if he was one of the weakest ones, even some gods couldn't do anything against his defense. Maybe the strongest enemy here wasn't the general, but Ladon. We are going to help you, Zoe said. There's no way we are going to let you fight him alone now, Talia said. Draco just smiled and shook his head. We don't have time for that. You have to free Artemis from the hands of Kronos' army. That's the most important thing right now. Draco stopped looking at all of them, including the Hesperides. Now he only had eyes for his prey, the evil dragon Ladon. This was going to be a fight to the death. The insomniac dragon shouldn't be sleeping. Wake up, Ladon, Draco shouted. The dragon stirred, glittering like a mountain of pennies. The Hesperides yelped and scattered. The lead girl said to Draco, Are you mad? Maybe I am, Draco said. I have the courage and the strength to be mad. The dragon Ladon was writhing now, 100 heads whipping around, tongues flickering and tasting the air. Zoe took a step forward, her arms raised. Zoe, don't, Talia said. You're not a Hesperid anymore. He'll kill you. Ladon is trained to protect the tree, Zoe said. Skirt around the edges of the garden. Go up the mountain. As long as I am a bigger threat, he should ignore thee. Shut up, stupid girl, Draco said. You're going to save Artemis. No, Zoe shouted. Ladon should recognize me. I can buy enough time for you to go up the mountain. It is the only way. Even the 5 of us together cannot fight him. Ladon opened his mouth. The sound of 100 heads hissing at once was enough to send a shiver to anyone's back. Draco pushed Zoe behind, and he received Ladon's breath up front. Now, he understood why Zoe that the dragon needs to chew the leaves. The fucking smell was like acid. It made Draco's only exposed part of his body, his eyes, burn. "Run!" Draco shouted. Talia and Percy went left, Bianca and Zoe went right. Draco walked straight toward the monster. "Hey, little dragon," Draco said. "Do you know how to dance?" Ladon shifted forward, then back. Some of the mouths closed. Some kept hissing, dragging confusion. Meanwhile, the Hesperides shimmered and turned into shadows. The voice of the eldest whispered, "Fool, you are too quiet, evil dragon," Draco continued, speaking in a mocking voice, trying to get all of the dragon's attention. "Maybe are you scared?" The dragon's eyes glinted. The rest were about halfway around the garden. Ahead, there was a single rocky trail leading up to the black peak of the mountain. The storm swirled above it, spinning on the summit like it was the axis for the whole world. For the first time, Ladon spoke. "This aura, so you're a new Dragon King, huh? The new generation is already at this level. Not bad. Since this is the first time we meet, I'm going to introduce myself. Ladon, Insomniac Dragon, is my name. I'm Draco, the Nephilim Dragon." Draco introduced himself. "Now, are you going to show me your real form, or are you going to fight like a shitty human?" Draco smiled. This kind of arrogance was what he was expecting from the evil dragon. But the dragon didn't give time to Draco to transform himself. He lunged at the younger dragon directly. Draco instincts are the reason of why he is alive right now. To tell you the truth, it wasn't easy to defend oneself from the attack of dozens of dragon heads. Still, Draco's reflexes were almost enough to defend himself from the evil dragon. I say almost because he was actually hit by one of the heads, receiving some damage. Not only that, as Ladon applied some venom on him. Draco. Race, Nephilim Dragon King. Level, 107 out of 125. HP, 143221/161250. MP, 153750/153750. STR, 1455. End, 1080. AGI, 1805. MAG, 1030. Status, poisoned, -150 HP every second. Fortunately, Percy and the rest had already made enough progress. Ladon was no longer a threat to them. Draco retreated out of range of the tree. To his surprise, Ladon did not pursue him. "What's going on?" Draco said. "Are you so afraid of me that you can't get away from your beloved trees?" Ladon hissed angrily. "The gods have cursed me. In exchange for returning to life, I cannot leave the tree if my life is not in danger. I curse you, you damned Olympians." So if Draco did not actively attack him, Ladon could not actively attack him. Of course, he could attack him if he approached the tree. It was his duty to protect it. But don't worry. Once Lord Kronos is reborn, I will be able to leave this place and bring chaos into the world. Draco took advantage of this situation to take two actions. The first one, status inspection. Ladon. Race, Divine Spirit. Strength, 4125. Defense, 7150. Magic, 12,250. Agility, 2,100. Abilities, immense defense. Barrier magic, plus time dilation barrier. As expected of an evil dragon, he is strong. Maybe his strength and agility stat is not that high, but his defense and magic stats are awesome. After his status inspection, Draco prepared himself for the battle. Firstly, he activated his Tuki. A light aura surrounded his body. The life force strengthens his stats by a 60%. Secondly, he activated branch destruction on his own body. All of his stats were doubled. And for the last, the dragon's roar was heard all over the mountain. For the second time since his evolution to a Dragon King, Draco transformed into his dragon form. The scales grew all over his body, from his arms and legs to his own head. His bones expanded, and a pair of long wings get out of his back. His eyes turned red as he looked at Ladon as he was looking at his prey. The human disappeared, There now stood an enormous dragon. The silver scales shone with elegancy, and what was the Tukey aura was now a royalty, draconic aura. The dragon was emitting a pressure that would turn any being weaker than him to his knees at the moment. The apple tree looked small compared to him, as he doubles its height. The extended wings of the dragon occupied perfectly 30 meters each, an unbelievable amount. Draco was only in the evolution of Dragon King, but he was already one of the largest dragons in existence. For example, he was already bigger than Tannen. Draco, STR, 4,656. End, 3,456. AGI, 5,776. MAG, 3,296. Draco had to bend down to look into Ladon's more than 200 eyes. Draco only had 2 eyes, but his eyes were not afraid at all. He knew he could fight Ladon, that he could win and kill him. Statistics aren't everything. He had already proved that by killing Nemean Lion. Right at that moment, Draco felt the creation of 2 barriers. The first was around the apple tree, and the second was a barrier around the entire mountain. You felt it, didn't you, Dragon King? Ladon said, "These 2 barriers are my strongest arsenal. Not even Zeus could pierce them without the continued use of his lightning bolt." "You seem pretty confident," Draco said. Now that he was in dragon form, his voice sounded deeper. "You're going to need them against me." "I don't think so. Those barriers took too much time to create," Ladon explained. "But only one of the 2 is made to protect." Draco understood what he meant. "You don't want us to leave?" "Of course. Your friends and that little goddess are going to die here at the hands of the general," Ladon laughed. "There's no way you can win." "Why do you all keep naming him by the general?" Draco asked. Ladon's eyes narrowed. "Remember this, young dragon. Some names have power. Don't be careless of how you use them. You won't even know how you die." Draco remembers that blast of lightning before. Probably it was because they mentioned Kronos that they received that attack. The general must be really strong if even Ladon was warier of him. Now a young dragon. Ladon's eyes focused on Draco. "Don't you think we have talked too much? Your friends have already reached the top of the mountain. Are you going to fight? Are you going to escape? Or are you going to join us?" Draco smiled, showing his huge fangs. "Do I really need to answer?" As Draco was with Ladon, the rest of the group ran up the mountain as the Hesperides resumed their song in the shadows behind them. At the top of the mountain were ruins, blocks of black granite and marble as big as houses. Broken columns. Statues of bronze that looked as though they'd been half melted. "The ruins of Mount Othries," Talia whispered in awe. "Yes," Zoe said. "It was not here before. This is bad." "What's Mount Othries?" Percy asked. Bianca wanted to know it as well. "The mountain fortress of the Titans," Zoe said. "In the First War, Olympus and Othries were the 2 rival capitals of the world. Othries was blasted to pieces in the First War. But how is it here?" Bianca asked. Talia looked around cautiously as they picked their way through the rubble, past blocks of marble and broken archways. "It moves in the same way that Olympus moves. It always exists on the edges of civilization. But the fact that it is here on this mountain is not good." "Why?" "This is Atlas's mountain," Zoe said. "Where he holds," she froze. Her voice was ragged with despair. "Where he used to hold up the sky." They had reached the summit. A few yards ahead of them, gray clouds swirled in a heavy vortex, making a funnel cloud that almost touched the mountaintop, but instead rested on the shoulders of a 12-year-old girl with auburn hair and a tattered silvery dress. Artemis, her legs bound to the rock with celestial bronze chains. Artemis was forced to hold the roof of the world. "My lady!" Zoe rushed forward, but Artemis said, "Stop. It is a trap. You must leave now." Her voice was strained. She was drenched in sweat. The weight of the sky was clearly too much for Artemis. Zoe was crying. She ran forward despite Artemis's protests and tugged at the chains. A booming voice spoke behind them. "Ah, how touching." They turned. The general was standing there in his brown silk suit. At his side were Luke and half a dozen Draceni bearing the golden sarcophagus of Kronos. Annabeth stood at Luke's side. She had her hands cuffed behind her back, a gag in her mouth, and Luke was holding the point of his sword to her throat. "Luke," Talia snarled. "Let her go." Luke's smile was weak and pale. He looked even worse than he had 3 days ago in D.C. That is the general's decision, Talia. "But it's good to see you again." Talia spat at him. The general chuckled. "So much for old friends. And you, Zoe. It's been a long time. How is my little traitor? I will enjoy killing you." "Do not respond," Artemis groaned. "Do not challenge him." "Wait a second," Percy said. "You're Atlas?" The general glanced at him. "So, even the stupidest of heroes can finally figure something out." "Yes, I am Atlas, the general of the Titans and terror of the gods. Congratulations. I will kill you presently, as soon as I deal with this wretched girl." "You're not going to hurt Zoe," Percy said. "I won't let you." The general sneered. "You have no right to interfere, little hero. This is a family matter." Percy frowned. "A family matter?" "Yes," Zoe said bleakly. "Atlas is my father." At that moment, a dragon roar was heard all over the mountain. "It seems that the two dragons are playing a little bit," Atlas commented with a half-smile. "The truth is, it is not pleasant to fight a dragon with more than 100 heads." Ladon's body was constituted in such a way that it is similar to that of an eastern dragon, with the shape of a snake with a width of a propulsion rocket, but with infinite heads coming out of it. The first to strike was Ladon. More than 20 heads bit at once, making it impossible for Draco to avoid them all. The dragon's teeth had poison in them, making the attacks even more effective. Level of resistance skill, poison resistance, was increased from 5 to 6. Draco also realized something else in that same attack. Ladon had a very high attack, almost at the same level as Draco's after using all his stats boosters. However, he had difficulty using 100% of this power with just one head. Not only that, but Draco's defensive skills negated much of this damage. Aegis, divine scales of the Nephilim dragon. This skill was Draco's main help at this time. Thanks to it, 80% of the damage Ladon was trying to apply was neutralized. Draco was not going to stand still either. Black flames began to burn around his huge dragon arms. He struck directly at one of the heads that was trying to bite him. Level of normal skill, Infernal Dragon Punch, was increased from 5 to 6. RORR? Ladon screamed in anger and pain. Although he had very high defense, one must be careful of Draco's punches. Although there was a 2,500-point difference between Draco's attack and Ladon's defense, the use of the Infernal Dragon Punch skills had an effect that no one could ignore. Draco's entire dragon aura merged with Surtur's flame to create a devastating punch. Ladon did not have the defense skills that Draco had, thus suffering great damage from that single blow. "You've got a good punch, young man," Ladon's head smiled. It didn't look like he was going to fall for a single punch. "But you can't beat me with just that." 80 of the heads opened their mouths, and Draco's senses were alarmed. A second later, 80 acid flashes descended upon the young Dragon King. Luckily, Draco had covered himself as best he could, enclosing his body in his wings. Feeling a new attack coming on, Draco flapped his wings and took to the air. He was faster than Ladon, so he couldn't catch up. From the air, Draco channeled his breath of darkness. The dark flame descended upon Ladon, consuming him in black flames. There was no way he could have dodged that attack. He must have suffered quite a bit of damage. No! Draco noticed that there was something that stood between his flames and Ladon. It was a barrier. It's true, Ladon specializes in barrier magic. Not even Azzy-Dahaka, the dragon of 1,000 forbidden magics, was up to Ladon's barrier magic. "Your attacks are useless, young man," Draco heard Ladon's laughter. "Very few things can overcome my magical barriers. I don't think your barriers are invincible," Draco said as he threw himself at Ladon with his burning arms. Using Infernal Dragon Punch on both fists, Draco plummeted from the sky. Knowing the power of that attack, Ladon was quick to create a powerful barrier to protect himself from the coming attack. Boom! The attack hit Ladon's barrier, creating a shockwave that traveled all the way inside the barrier that Insomniac Dragon had created around the mountain. If Draco had not had the skill, the one who is loved by nature, the skill that does not allow him to harm nature, a good portion of the mountain would have disappeared. If Ladon had not put up the barrier, the shock wave would have reached the city of San Francisco and destroyed the Golden Gate. At the top of the mountain, everyone felt the mini-earthquake caused by the dragon's crash. Atlas even felt a little uncomfortable, recognizing the power of those two supernatural forces. Even Ladon, the weakest of all the evil dragons, had powers that the gods could not easily defeat. Along with his innate defense, Ladon's magical barriers made his defense almost impenetrable for nothing in the world. Draco realized why this dragon was among the select group of dragons feared by all mythologies. Draco's attack had succeeded in destroying Ladon's hurried barrier, but he had lost a lot of power, and the blow had been completely cushioned by the hard scales of the evil dragon. Instantly, Ladon counterattacked with his heads. His arms, torso, legs, wings, neck, all possible places were being bitten by Ladon. This counterattack had been very hard, causing great damage to Draco. Blood was pouring out of more than hundreds of deep wounds. While Draco was fighting Ladon, the rest of the group were on the top of the mountain. "Let Artemis go," Zoe demanded. Atlas walked closer to the chained goddess. "Perhaps you'd like to take the sky for her, then? Be my guest." Zoe opened her mouth to speak, but Artemis said no. "Do not offer, Zoe. I forbid you." Atlas smirked. He knelt next to Artemis and tried to touch her face, but the goddess bit at him, almost taking off his fingers. "Hoo-hoo." Atlas chuckled. "You see, daughter? Lady Artemis likes her new job. I think I will have all the Olympians take turns carrying my burden once Lord Kronos rules again, and this is the center of our palace. It will teach those weaklings some humility." "I don't understand," Percy said. "Why can't Artemis just let go of the sky?" Atlas laughed. "How little you understand, young one. This is the point where the sky and the earth first met, where Aurenas and Gaia first brought forth their mighty children, the Titans. The sky still yearns to embrace the earth. Someone must hold it at bay, or else it would crush down upon this place, instantly flattening and everything within 100 leagues. Once you have taken the burden, there is no escape." Atlas smiled. "Unless someone else takes it from you." He approached them, studying Talia and Percy. "So, these are the best heroes of the age, huh? Not much of a challenge." "Fight us," Percy said. "And let's see. Have the gods taught you nothing? An immortal doesn't fight a mere mortal directly. It is beneath our dignity. I will have Luke crush you instead." "So, you're another coward," Percy said. Atlas's eyes glowed with hatred. With difficulty, he turned his attention to Talia. "As for you, daughter of Zeus, it seems Luke was wrong about you." "I wasn't wrong," Luke said. He looked terribly weak, and he spoke every word as if it were painful. "Talia, you still can join us. Call the Ophiutorus. It will come to you. Look." He waved his hand, and next to them a pool of water appeared, a pond ringed in black marble, big enough for the Ophiutorus. But there was a problem, a mistake that Luke and the rest have committed. It wasn't Talia the one that the Ophiutorus was following, it was Percy. In fact, the son of Poseidon almost called the Ophiutorus by accident. "Talia, call the Ophiutorus," Luke persisted, "and you will be more powerful than the gods." "Luke!" Her voice was full of pain. "What happened to you? Don't you remember all those times we talked? All those times we cursed the gods? Our fathers have done nothing for us. They have no right to rule the world." Talia shook her head. "Free Annabeth. Let her go." "If you join me," Luke promised, "it can be like old times. The three of us together, fighting for a better world." "Please, Talia, if you don't agree." His voice faltered. "It's my last chance. He will use the other way if you don't agree. Please." The fear in his voice sounded real. Luke was in danger. His life depended on Talia's joining his cause. And Talia might believe it too. "Do not, Talia," Zoe warned. "You're a hunter now. We must fight them." Luke waved his hand again, and a fire appeared. A bronze brazier just like the one at camp. A sacrificial flame. "Talia," Percy said. "No." Bianca stood there in silence. She was too scared to say anything. Behind Luke, the golden sarcophagus began to glow. As it did, they saw images in the mist all around them. Black marble walls rising, the ruins becoming whole, a terrible and beautiful palace rising around them, made of fear and shadow. "We will raise Mount Othries right here," Luke promised, in a voice so strained it was hardly his. "Once more, it will be stronger and greater than Olympus. Look, Talia. We are not weak." He pointed toward the ocean. Marching up the side of the mountain, from the beach where the Princess Andromeda was docked, was a great army. Draceni and Lestragonians, monsters and half-bloods, hellhounds, harpies, and other monsters. The whole ship must have been empty because there were hundreds, maybe even more than 1,000. And they were marching towards them. In a few minutes, they would be there. Boom! The mountain trembled. The battle between the two dragons was affecting the whole landscape. The army was shocked, fearing an enemy attack. It was quite an hilarious scene. "This is only a taste of what is to come," Lucas said, calming himself from those temblors. "Soon we will be ready to storm Camp Half-Blood. And after that, Olympus itself. All we need is your help." For a terrible moment, Talia hesitated. She gazed at Luke, her eyes full of pain, as if the only thing she wanted in the world was to believe him. Then she leveled her spear. "You aren't Luke. I don't know you anymore." "Yes, you do, Talia," he pleaded. Don't make him destroy you." There was no time. If that army got to the top of the hill, they would be overwhelmed. At that moment, the earth shook again. "Up," Bianca said. They all followed her eyes, and they met the most incredible thing of the night. The golden flame ascended directly to heaven. A few seconds later, that same golden ray fell, threatening to split the mountain in half. The tremors caused by the battle between the two dragons stopped completely. The battle was over. "Roes!" The youngest did not know what that majestic roar meant. But Zoe, Atlas, and Artemis, those who had lived for millennia, knew perfectly that it was all this oppressive aura that was gathering in the mountain. "One more dragon has reached that level," murmured the goddess. Let's return back a little bit. Draco was fighting Ladon, and both were quite injured at the time. The difference between the power was quite wide, but Draco's skills narrowed that gap to the point where they were now more or less even. Ladon's attacks did not vary. They were always the same, but at the same time they were impossible to avoid. Draco was much bigger than the evil dragon, which at the same time made him an easier target for Ladon to attack and much harder for the young dragon to defend himself. The main problem with Ladon's attacks was the poison he inflicted on each of Draco's wounds. Little by little, this poison weakened Draco. Especially problematic were Ladon's magical barriers. Not only was Ladon's defense extremely high, but his barriers were very difficult to penetrate. Using Infernal Dragon Punch, Draco's most powerful attack, not counting his noble phantasm, he could barely destroy those barriers and strike a blow at Ladon. Of course, this consumed an immense amount of mana. Draco's MP was dropping at about the same time as his HP. Draco used his best attack again, and Ladon repeated his strategy. With a powerful magical barrier, the evil dragon blocked 80% of Draco's attack. His scales blocked another 10%. Instantly, he counterattacked him with his hundreds of heads. But Draco had already learned this pattern of defense and attack. He had already prepared his own defense for that moment, the moment when Ladon was at his weakest. Using Dark Fang, Draco caught just under a dozen heads. However, instead of biting and releasing them to escape, Draco held them a little longer. Inside, he was channeling yet another attack. The dark flames burned Ladon's heads. Draco had used Breath of Darkness, while the heads were still inside, burning them at close range. This attack was very effective, as Ladon attacked like crazy, trying to get Draco to release them. But Draco did not release them, and continued to burn them without stopping. With Numbing Darkness claws, he defended himself as best he could. With a little luck, several of the heads that were hit by him would freeze and fall directly to the ground. This was a side effect of this ability. With the repeated use of these skills, Draco would level them up. Thus, he was doing more and more damage to Ladon. What was really saving Draco from death was none other than his skill, automatic HP recovery, plus the very regeneration that his Nephilim Dragon King race was giving him. Per second, he should recover a little more than 350 HP. However, his skill at level 4 was 4 times that number. Thanks to that, he was able to slow down the damage caused by the poison. With the poison resistance skill at level 7, the poison damage was 100 HP per second per wound. Right now, Draco was losing almost 3,000 HP per second from the poison alone. The poison was taking away 1,600 HP per second. If this continued, Draco would die in the next minute. If Ladon continued to create wounds from which to poison Draco, our protagonist was going to die a great deal within a minute. Maybe 30 seconds was the most the dragon could hope for. Draco was fucked up, but he wasn't the only one. Both dragons smiled mercilessly at their adversary despite the brutality of their battle. As much as Draco was a Nephilim, a hybrid, you could now see that his origins were the same as the dragon in front of him. Because of Draco's skills, he could deny much of the damage he was receiving. He was understanding at this time why even Ladon, with statistics lower than Aphrodite, was part of the group of dragons feared by all mythologies. If it weren't for all the skills Draco had, he'd be more than dead right now. This poison, these magical barriers, Ladon's entire set was fearsome. Ladon had the perfect combination: a virtually impenetrable defense, a terrifying poison, and hundreds of heads to apply it. The best way not to die in front of Ladon was not to confront him. But that doesn't apply to a monster like Draco. Ladon didn't have all of Draco's literally broken skills, so even if he could deny 90% of Infernal Dragon Punch's damage, he couldn't do the same with the rest of his attacks. Dozens of his heads had died in this fight, and he was close to death as well. Ladon had less HP than Draco at this point, and both knew it. If they continued to fight like crazy, the chances were that they would both die. Draco opened his dragon eyes wide when he saw what Ladon was doing. Growling, "I didn't expect you to be a coward," Draco said. "Ha ha. There is nothing more pleasant than watching my adversary die drowned in poison." Ladon had locked himself in his own fence. Not only that, but he was putting up barrier after barrier in front of him. The evil dragon did not want to die after being brought back to life. He did not want to die again. That's why, if there was a way to win without dying, he was going to do that, even if it led to him being considered a coward for the next millennia. Draco didn't stand still when he saw this. He threw himself into it, constantly hitting the barriers of Ladon. But it was no use. It was obvious that by putting up barriers so quickly, they would become weaker. And so it was. Now, with each punch, Draco was breaking 2 barriers. The problem was that for every 2 barriers he destroyed, Ladon created 3. In less than 15 seconds, Ladon had created a dozen barriers between him and Draco. Draco went through a brief moment of despair. Was he going to die here? No, he still had cards to play. In fact, Draco had not yet used his most powerful cards. He hadn't, though, for obvious reasons. A dragon couldn't use Noble Phantasm on humans. Could he? So what could Draco do? No. Wait, you foo-foo. I have one that wasn't originally used by a human. Draco laughed. What? Ladon asked when he heard him muttering. Draco didn't answer, and only showed his teeth in a cruel dragon smile. Ladon began to have a bad feeling inside. Leviathan, a small compared to Draco's size, sword appeared in front of Draco. The sword was off, with all its powers sealed under 9 seals. The sword that Draco obtained through the system belonged to a fire giant Surtur. It was a sword that a giant used, so its true size should be much larger. And so it was. Ladon watched, with fear in his eyes, as the sword that was 10 times smaller than him grew to a height similar to that of Hera's golden apple tree. The sword, which was originally dull, burst into a golden glow when it reached Draco's hands. Yes, if this is what it takes. There's no way I can't kill you. Draco smiled as he grabbed the sword. The feeling he had when he held the sword was the same as when he held it in his hands in human form. It seemed that Rama's fate skill was still acting even when Draco was a dragon. My question is, how many of your seals can I lift with my current strength? 9 seals limited Leviathan's power, making the sword only an A rank. Draco introduced all his magical power into the sword. He was to spend all his remaining MP in a single attack, a fatal attack with which to kill Ladon. The seals had nothing to do with MP, but with magic power. Draco could choose how much of his magic power he was going to attack with, and obviously he was going to use it all. First seal, opened. Second seal, open. Third seal, open. Fourth seal. Draco felt he had hit a bottomless pit when trying to unlock the fourth seal. His magical power was insufficient to unlock the fourth seal. Well, 3 seals are enough, Draco muttered. Blood was already starting to flow from his mouth. He had just over 20 seconds to live. The sword shone like the sun. Ladon was shaking from behind his barriers. For the first time for the evil dragon, he felt fear. I don't want to destroy the whole state, Draco said. But this attack should be enough. Draco had no doubt that by using Loptra Legjarn, he would at least destroy the state he was in. With all the seals unlocked, Surtur was able to destroy the 9 kingdoms of Scandinavia. How much could Draco destroy with 3 seals? That's why he was only going to use Levitian's real name, an attack similar to Artoria's Excalibur or Mordred's Clarent Blood Arthur. Levitian, the sword akin to the Son of Calamity. The sunbeam shot up into the sky and fell on Ladon's barriers. Draco only watched with cold eyes as barrier after barrier was destroyed under the power of Ladon. The evil dragon had strengthened them by seeing the power of the sword, but it was still insufficient. Levitian broke through the last and strongest defense. Ladon launched a last defense, throwing acid flashes on the sun's attack. It is useless. And indeed, a second later, Draco was notified. Percy did not miss this moment of distraction. Now, he said to the rest of the group. Together, they charged. Talia went straight for Luke. The power of her shield was so great that his dragon women bodyguards fled in panic, dropping the golden coffin and leaving him alone. But despite his sickly appearance, Luke was still quick with his sword. He snarled like a wild animal and counterattacked. When his sword, Backbiter, met Talia's shield, a ball of lighting erupted between them, frying the air with yellow tendrils of power. As for Percy, he did the stupidest thing in his life. He attacked the Titan Lord Atlas. He laughed as Percy approached. A huge javelin appeared in his hands. His silk suit melted into full Greek battle armor. "Go on, then." "Percy," Zoe said. "Beware." Percy knew what she was warning him about. Chiron had told him long ago, immortals are constrained by ancient rules. But a hero can go anywhere, challenge anyone, as long as he has the nerve. Once Percy attacked, however, Atlas was free to attack back directly with all his might. Percy swung his sword, and Atlas knocked him aside with the shaft of his javelin. Percy flew through the air and slammed into a black wall. It wasn't mist anymore. The palace was rising, brick by brick. It was becoming real. "Fools!" Atlas screamed gleefully, swatting aside one of Zoe's arrows. "Did you think, simply because you could challenge that petty war god, that you could stand up to me?" The mention of Ares sent a jolt through Percy. He shook off his daze and charged again. If he could get to that pool of water, he could double his strength. The javelin's point slashed toward him like a scythe. He raised Riptide, planning to cut off Atlas' weapon at the shaft, but his arm felt like lead. The sword suddenly weighed a ton, and Percy remembered Ares' warning, spoken on the beach in Los Angeles so long ago. When you need it most, your sword will fail you. Percy tried to dodge, but the javelin caught him in the chest and sent him flying like a rag doll. He slammed into the ground, his head spinning. He looked up and found he was at the feet of Artemis, still straining under the weight of the sky. "Run, boy," she told him. "You must run." Atlas was taking his time, coming towards Percy. Luke and Talia were fighting like demons, lightning cracking around them. Annabeth was on the ground, desperately struggling to free her hands. "Die, little hero," Atlas said. He raised his javelin to impale Percy. "No!" Zoe yelled, and a volley of silver arrows sprouted from the armpit chink in Atlas' armor. "Args!" He bellowed and turned towards his daughter. Percy remembered the words of the prophecy. The Titan's curse must one withstand. He couldn't hope to beat Atlas. But there was someone else who might stand a chance. The sky, Percy told the goddess. Give it to me? No, boy, Artemis said. Her forehead was beaded with metallic sweat, like quicksilver. You don't know what you're asking. It will crush you. Annabeth took it. She barely survived. She had the spirit of a true huntress. You will not last so long. I'll die anyway, he said. Give me the weight of the sky. Percy didn't wait for her answer. He took out Riptide and slashed through her chains. Then he stepped next to her and braced himself on one knee, holding up his hands, and touched the cold, heavy clouds. For a moment, Artemis and Percy bore the weight together. It was the heaviest thing he'd ever felt, as if he were being crushed under 1,000 trucks. He wanted to black out from the pain, but he breathed deeply. He can do this. Then Artemis slipped out from under the burden, and Percy held it alone. Every muscle in his body turned to fire. His bones felt like they were melting. He wanted to scream, but he didn't have the strength to open his mouth. He began to sink lower and lower to the ground, the sky's weight crushing him. Artemis fought directly with Atlas. Atlas, in his full battle armor, jabbing with his javelin, laughing insanely as he fought. And Artemis, a blur of silver. She had 2 wicked hunting knives, each as long as her arm, and she slashed wildly at the Titan, dodging and leaping with unbelievable grace. She seemed to change forms as she maneuvered. She was a tiger, a gazelle, a bear, a falcon. Zoe shot arrows at her father, with the help of Bianca, aiming for the chinks in his armor. He roared in pain each time one found its mark, but they affected him like bee stings. He just went madder and kept fighting. Talia and Luke went spear on sword, lightning still flashing around them. Talia pressed Luke back with the aura of her shield. Even he was not immune to it. He retreated, wincing and growling in frustration. Yield! Talia yelled. You never could beat me, Luke. He bared his teeth. We'll see, my old friend. Atlas advanced, pressing Artemis. She was fast, but his strength was unstoppable. His javelin slammed into the earth where Artemis had been split second before, and a fissure opened in the rocks. He leapt over it and kept pursuing her. She was leading him back toward Percy. Get ready, she spoke in Percy's mind. You fight well for a girl. Atlas laughed. But you are no match for me. He feinted with the tip of his javelin, and Artemis dodged. Atlas' javelin swept around and knocked Artemis' legs off the ground. She fell, and Atlas brought up his javelin tip for the kill. No! Zoe screamed. She leapt between her father and Artemis and shot an arrow straight into the Titan's forehead, where it lodged like a unicorn's horn. Atlas bellowed in rage. He swept aside his daughter with the back of his hand, sending her flying into the black rocks. Zoe! Bianca shouted as she ran towards the huntress. Then, Atlas turned on Artemis with a look of triumph in his face. Artemis seemed to be wounded. She didn't get up. The first blood in a new war, Atlas gloated, and he stabbed downward. As fast as thought, Artemis grabbed his javelin staff. It hit the earth right next to her, and she pulled backwards, using the javelin like a lever, kicking the Titan Lord and sending him flying over her. Percy saw him coming down on top of him, and he realized what would happen. He loosened his grip on the sky, and as Atlas slammed into him, he didn't try to hold on. He let himself be pushed out of the way and rolled for all he was worth. The weight of the sky dropped on Atlas' back, almost smashing him until he managed to get to his knees, struggling to get out from under the crushing weight of the sky. But it was too late. No! He bellowed so hard it shook the mountain. Not again! Atlas was trapped under his old burden. Talia backed Luke to the edge of a cliff, but still, they fought on, next to the golden coffin. Talia had tears in her eyes. Luke had a bloody slash across his chest, and his pale face glistened with sweat. He lunged at Talia, and she slammed him with her shield. Luke's sword spun out of his hands and clattered to the rocks. Talia put her spear point to his throat. For a moment, there was silence. Well? Luke asked. He tried to hide it, but there was fear in his voice. Talia trembled with fury. Behind her, Annabeth came scrambling, finally free from her bonds. Her face was bruised and streaked with dirt. Don't kill him. He's a traitor, Talia said. A traitor. We'll bring Luke back, Annabeth pleaded. To Olympus. He'll be useful. Is that what you want, Talia? Luke sneered. To go back to Olympus in triumph? To please you. Luke couldn't finish his speech. An arrow was shot right into his shoulder. He lost his balance, terror on his face, and then he fell. Luke! Annabeth screamed. They rushed to the cliff's edge. Below them, the army from the Princess Andromeda had stopped in amazement. They were staring at Luke's broken from on the rocks. Then, they heard a voice from behind. Arg, I came late to join the fun. They looked behind just to find Draco in his human form with his bow in hands. At least I could shoot down a big shot, he said carelessly. Before any of them could say anything, one of the giants looked up and growled, Kill them. Oh, so we still have some more praise. Draco said cheerfully. He was so against the mood right now. Talia and Annabeth were crying, and Percy wasn't happy. But here he was smiling like a little child. Talia was stiff with grief at the border of the cliff, tears streaming down her cheeks. Percy had to pull her back as a wave of javelins sailed over their heads. The three of them ran for the rocks, ignoring Atlas and leaving Draco back. Hey, any one of you wants to fight me? Draco shouted. I just killed Ladon, and I want to fight a little more. He let all of his aura out, intimidating the little monsters. They cower in fear, and they didn't dare to take a step forward. Then, Draco let out a creepy smile. Fuck off, Artemis! Percy yelled as they ran. The goddess looked up, her face almost as grief-stricken as Talia's. Besides her was Bianca, crying. Zoe lay in the goddess' arms. She was breathing. Her eyes were open. But still, it's a fatal wound, Artemis said. Her lungs are crushed. The stars, Zoe murmured. I cannot see them. Nectar and ambrosia, Percy said. Come on, we have to get her some. No one move. Grief hung in air. The army of Kronos was just below the rise, and Draco was the only one holding them in position. Even Artemis was too shocked to stir. The army of monster backed a bit because of Draco's pressure, but they started to come up again. There were hundreds of strong monsters there. Most of them were at T3 level, and dozens of them were at T4 level. Tiers are going to be explained in info at the end of the chapter. Draco wasn't in the best conditions to fight, as Ladon's poison was still on his body. He healed more than he loses, but he was still pretty low on HP and MP. He didn't really want to fight this army right now. But Draco heard a strange, buzzing noise. Just as the army was coming over the hill, a Sopwith camel swooped down out of the sky. Get away from my daughter, Dr. Chase called down, and his machine guns burst to life, peppering the ground with bullet holes and startling the whole group of monsters in a scattering. Dad, yelled Annabeth in disbelief. Run, he called back, his voice growing fainter as the biplane swooped by. This shook Artemis out of her grief. She stared up at the antique plane, which was now banking around for another strafe. A brave man, Artemis said with grudging approval. Come, we must get Zoe away from here. She raised her hunting horn to her lips, and its clear sound echoed down the valleys of Marin. Zoe's eyes were fluttering. Hang in there, Percy told her. It'll be all right. The Sopwith camel swooped down again. A few giants threw javelins, and one flew straight between the wings of the plane, but the machine guns blazed. They realized with amazement that somehow Dr. Chase must have gotten hold of celestial bronze to fashion his bullets. The first row of snaked women wailed as the machine gun's volley blew them in a sulphurous yellow powder. Ack! Draco murmured in the distance. What a waste of EXP. That's my dad, Annabeth said in amazement. They didn't have time to admire his flying. The giants and snake women were already recovering from their surprise. Dr. Chase would be in trouble soon. Just then, the moonlight brightened, and a silver chariot appeared from the sky, drawn by the most beautiful deer. It landed right next to them. Get in, Artemis said. Annabeth helped Percy get Talia on board. Then Percy helped Artemis with Zoe. They wrapped Zoe in a blanket. Hey, are you going to leave me here? Don't waste more time, Draco, Artemis said. You still have your own wings to get out of here. Okay. When Draco get into the chariot, Artemis pulled the reins, and the chariot sped away from the mountain, straight into the air. Like Santa Claus' sleigh, Percy murmured, still dazed with pain. Artemis took time to look back at him. Indeed, young half-blood. And where do you think that legend came from? Seeing them safely away, Dr. Chase turned his biplane and followed them like an honor guard. It must have been one of the strangest sights ever, even for the Bay Area. A silver flying chariot pulled by deer, escorted by a Sopwith camel. Behind them, the army of Kronos roared in anger as they gathered on the summit of Mount Tamalpais. But the loudest sound was the voice of Atlas, bellowing curses against the gods as he struggled under the weight of the sky. "Ah, shut up, stupid Titan," Draco said. "I'm more frustrated than you right now." Annabeth looked strangely at this new boy she didn't know anything about. "Why?" she asked. "I wanted to fight Atlas at least. It would be great if I could kill him," Draco answered. "Who is going to hold the sky if you kill him?" Artemis asked. "I don't care about the sky," Draco shrugged. "Just let poor Aurina's embrace Terra one more time." Artemis sighed, not wanting to talk more to the stupid dragon. "Oh, you look pretty bad, Zoe." Draco's arms started to take a golden glow. Then, he took Zoe out of the blanket and held her in his arms. "What are you doing?" Artemis shot a look at Draco. "Trying to keep her alive," Draco said. "She's in a pretty bad shape. Can you see it? She can barely breathe with the lungs in that state." Draco was using his skill, Holy Healing Claws, to try and keep Zoe alive. But it was difficult, really difficult. This was different from the time Tobio almost killed his childhood friend. Broken ribs, the spine was crooked, and the lungs unrecognizable. They landed at Crissy Field after nightfall. All that time, Draco was doing his best to save Zoe from the death. As soon as Dr. Chase stepped out of his Sopwith camel, Annabeth ran to him and gave him a huge hug. "Dad, you flew, you shot. Oh my gods, that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen." Her father blushed. "Well, not bad for a middle-aged mortal, I suppose. But the celestial bronze bullets, how did you get those?" "Oh well, you did leave quite a few half-blood weapons in your room in Virginia. The last time you left." Annabeth looked down, embarrassed. Dr. Chase was very careful not to say ran away. "I decided to try melting some down to make bullet casings," he continued. "Just a little experiment." He said it was no big deal, but he had a gleam in his eye. Draco could understand all of a sudden why Athena, goddess of crafts and wisdom, had taken a liking to him. He was an excellent mad scientist at heart. "Dad," Annabeth faltered. "Annabeth, Percy," Talia interrupted. Her voice was urgent. She and Artemis were kneeling at Zoe's side, who was wrapped in Draco's arms, binding the huntress' wounds. Both ran over to help, but there wasn't much they could do. They had no ambrosia or nectar. No regular medicine would help. It was dark, but they could see that Zoe didn't look good. She was shivering, and the faint glow that usually hung around her was fading. "Can't you heal her with magic?" Percy asked Artemis. "I mean, you're a goddess." Artemis looked troubled. "Life is a fragile thing, Percy. If the fates will the string to be cut, there is little I can do. But I can try." She tried to set her hand on Zoe's side, but Zoe gripped her wrist. She looked into the goddess' eyes, and some kind of understanding passed between them. "Have I served thee well?" Zoe whispered. With Draco's cure, she was able to speak, but he couldn't save her. "With great honor," Artemis said softly. "The finest of my attendants." Zoe's face relaxed. "Rest. At last. I can try to heal you, my brave one." But in that moment, Draco knew that she couldn't be saved by any healing. Zoe had known all along that the oracle's prophecy was about her. She would die by a parent's hand. And yet she'd taken the quest anyway. She had chosen to save Artemis, and Atlas' fury had broken her inside. Zoe looked at Bianca and took her hand. "I'm sorry that I couldn't guide you anymore," she said. "I hope you can grow into a strong and dependable hunter." "Don't say that," Bianca cried. "You can't die now." Zoe smiled weakly, and then she saw Talia and took her hand. "I am sorry we argued," Zoe said. "I was glad that we could be sisters for short." "It's my fault," Talia said, blinking hard. "You were right about Luke, about heroes, men, everything." "Perhaps not all men," Zoe murmured. She smiled weakly at Draco. It was an honor to fight along you. You're the first and only man that I'm going to respect in my life. Why do you think I'm a good man? Draco asked, confused. I'm a Nephilim. I'm evil and holy at the same time. Do you think that you have seen through me in just a week? Zoe was shocked. She didn't expect this change in Draco. We had a promise, right? Draco asked. You swore on the river Styx that you would do anything that I asked one time, right? Zoe nodded weakly, but didn't understand what he meant. Then, you are becoming my servant. You want to spend one fate point to make Zoe Nightshade your servant. Yes, I want. Zoe Nightshade is not willing, you can't. Fuck. Draco cursed and looked towards Artemis, who was looking at the dragon with cold eyes. Force her to do it. It will save her life. Zoe was already dying. She couldn't hear well. She just sensed a force trying to bind her to someone that wasn't Artemis. Stars, she whispered. I can see the stars again, my lady. A tear trickled down Artemis' cheek. Are you sure, Draco? Can this save her life? I will leave explanations for later, Draco said. Trust me? Artemis nodded. Zoe, trust Draco and follow his order. You swore on River Styx, didn't you? Lady Artemis? Do it, please. Do your last work for your goddess? Zoe nodded with a smile, letting that strange force bind her towards Draco. Zoe agreed with being a servant. Choose class. Draco smiled a little. Stars, Zoe repeated, her eyes fixed on the night sky, and she did not move again. Talia lowered her head. Annabeth gulped down a sob, and her father put his hands on her shoulders. Bianca was crying, and Artemis stood there looking at Zoe. Then, the goddess looked at Draco. You said you could save her. And I did, Draco nodded. I can't feel me connection with her. It disappeared. That was because I severed it, Draco explained. She is now no longer your hunter, but my servant. For a moment, they didn't see anything different. Then Annabeth gasped, looking again at Zoe. A strange silver lighting surrounded her body. Slowly, she opened her eyes. I'm alive, she asked when she saw all of them. Welcome to your new life, my dear servant, Draco smiled. What? Zoe was disoriented for a moment, but then she remembered her last moments. It had been Artemis who had decided that this was the best thing for her. But she would rather move on to the next life than stop being a hunter. I understand what you're thinking, Zoe, Draco said. I'll explain to you later what it means to be a servant. What can it mean, other than being a man's personal servant? She asked with a bitter smile. Nothing of the sort, Draco shook his head. To begin with, don't you notice anything different about your body? This didn't just catch Zoe's attention, it caught Artemis as well. She's stronger. Much stronger, the goddess muttered. Zoe also seemed to have noticed the same thing. But how? These are the benefits of becoming a servant, Draco explained. In fact, you are not alone. You've already met two in Japan. Zoe remembered Mordred and Kuroka. At that moment, she was surprised to feel how strong they were. Now she understood why they were so strong. Although you are my servant, and I am your master, this contract is one of equals, Draco said. We both have the same importance in this contract. There are many more things to explain, but this is not the place or the time, Draco continued. Just remember that if I die, you die. Our lives are linked that way. I see, Zoe muttered. I must go to Olympus immediately, Artemis said. I will not be able to take you, but I will send help. The goddess set her hand on Annabeth's shoulder. You are brave beyond measure, my hunter. You will do right in this new life. Then she looked towards Talia and Bianca, the two youngest hunters. You did a nice job, my young ones. She turned to Percy. You did well, she said. For a man. Finally, she looked back towards Draco and Zoe. Take good care of her, she said. Zoe is my most precious hunter. She mounted her chariot, which began to glow. There was a flash of silver, and the goddess was gone. Well, Dr. Chase sighed. She was impressive, though I must say I still prefer Athena. Annabeth turned toward him. Dad, I'm sorry that. Sure. He hugged her. Do what you must, my dear. I know this isn't easy for you. His voice was a little shaky, but he gave Annabeth a brave smile. Then, they heard the whoosh of large wings. 3 Pegasi descended through the fog. 2 white-winged horses and 1 pure black one. "Blackjack," Percy called. "They have a short horse talk. These are my friends. We need to get to Olympus pretty fast." The only problem was the professor. He couldn't go to Olympus since he is just a mortal. But he was staring open-mouthed at the Pegasi. "Fascinating," he said. "Such maneuverability. How does the wingspan compensate for the weight of the horse's body, I wonder?" Blackjack cocked his head. "Why, if the British had had these Pegasi in the cavalry charges on the Crimea," Dr. Chase said, "the charge of the Light Brigade." "Dad!" Annabeth interrupted. Dr. Chase blinked. He looked at his daughter and managed a smile. "I'm sorry, my dear. I know you must go." He gave her one last awkward, well-meaning hug. There were 3 Pegasi, and they were 6 persons. Talia and Bianca went to one of the Pegasi. Annabeth and Percy climbed on Blackjack, and Draco and Zoe went to the last one. Dr. Chase finally called Annabeth. I know San Francisco is a dangerous place for you. But please remember, you always have a home with us. We will keep you safe." Annabeth didn't answer, but her eyes were red as she turned away. Dr. Chase started to say more, then apparently thought better of it. He raised his hand in a sad farewell and trudged away across the dark field. Soon, San Francisco was only a glittering crescent behind them, with an occasional flicker of lightning in the north. Talia was so exhausted she fell asleep on her Pegasi's back. Bianca had to hug her from behind to hold her, and the Pegasi also helped with that. Annabeth and Percy seemed to have a conversation on Blackjack. "So, are they going to tell me more about being a servant?" Zoe said. "What am I going to do from now on?" I guess you're coming with me to Japan," Draco said. "You don't really have to do anything for now." "Well, we are going to another world in a few days." He just said that casually, like it was normal to do that. "What?" Zoe asked. "Going to another world?" It's difficult to explain from the start. The whole concept of master and servant come from another world, a parallel one. We are going there to participate in the Holy Grail War. Holy Grail War? A war between 7 servants and 7 masters. They fight for the right to get the Holy Grail, an object that can give you any wish you want. But we are going to be exceptions in that war, an 8 master and his 3 servants. What is your wish? Draco denied with his head. I don't have any wish. But they're going to fight in that war for the wish, right? Not exactly. You see, the war we are going is corrupted. The Grail is not going to give me any wish. Although I know of another war that indeed give that wish, but that's for a later date. What I want is to kill as much servants and masters as I can. Zoe didn't understand why Draco wanted to kill that much. You want to know? I'm not a psycho, at least not right now. I can tell you that I have a curse and a blessing at the same time. I have the ability to increase my power very quickly, but that comes at a price. I cannot improve by normal means. I am doomed to remain at the same level unless they kill, right? Zoe guessed. Exactly, Draco nodded. The stronger my opponent is, the more powerful I become. You've noticed that, haven't you? How much stronger I have become after killing Ladon. Zoe already assumed that Draco had killed Ladon. The prophecy said that one dragon had to kill the other, and Draco was the one that was still alive. The same goes for my servants. My strength is also improved with your kills, and your strength is improved when my strength grows. The towns were zipping by faster now, islands of light thicker together, until the whole landscape below was a glittering carpet. Dawn was close. The eastern sky was turning gray. The servants are divided in 7 classes principally, Draco explained. Saber, Archer, Lancer, Rider, Berserker, Assassin, and Caster. Yours is Archer, and it comes with the skill independent action. Even if I don't allow you to whatever you want, you can to whatever place you want. You can still hunt with Artemis if you want. Draco leave that option open to Zoe, but she denied with her head. My times in the hunt has already ended. I'm not going back there. She looked towards Talia and Bianca. Is the time to let the new generation get the lead? Draco nodded, respecting her decision. But you don't mind helping me a little bit when Artemis called me, right? Zoe smiled a little. Only if you want my help. There it is, Talia's voice. She'd woken up. She was pointing toward Manhattan, which was quickly zooming into view. It has started? What started? Draco asked. Then he looked where she was pointing. High above the Empire State Building, Olympus was its own island of light, a floating mountain ablaze with torches and braziers, white marble palaces gleaming in the early morning air. The winter solstice, Talia said. The Council of the Gods. They circled over Midtown Manhattan, making one complete orbit around Mount Olympus. Draco had never been here, so it was his first time seeing this place. It was amazing. In the early morning darkness, torches and fires made the mountainside palaces glow 20 different colors, from blood red to indigo. Apparently, no one ever slept on Olympus. The twisting streets were full of demigods and nature spirits, and minor godlings bustling about, riding chariots or sedan chairs carried by cyclopes. Winter didn't seem to exist here. Draco caught the scent of the gardens in full bloom, jasmine and roses, and even sweeter things he couldn't name. Music drifted up from many windows, the soft sounds of lyres and reed pipes. Towering at the peak of the mountain was the greatest of all, the glowing white hall of the gods. Their Pegasi set them down in the outer courtyard, in front of huge silver gates. Before they could even think to knock, the gates opened by themselves. Blackjack and his friends flew off, leaving Talia, Annabeth, Percy, Bianca, and Draco alone. For a minute, they stood there regarding the palace. And then, side by side, they walked into the throne room. 12 enormous thrones made AU around a central hearth, just like the placement of the cabins at the camp. The ceiling above glittered with constellations. All of the seats were occupied. Each god and goddess was about 15 feet tall. Probably those were their true forms. They weren't humans, so their human form was just a facade while these giants' forms were the true ones. Draco looked into every god and goddess here. Ones were weaker than the other, but all of them were really powerful beings. And the two strongest were, without a doubt, the two brothers, Poseidon and Zeus. "Welcome, heroes," Artemis said. "Mo." Draco had already noticed Bessie and Grover before. A sphere of water was hovering in the center of the room, next to the hearth fire. Bessie was swimming happily around, swishing his serpent tail and poking his head out the sides and bottom of the sphere. He seemed to be enjoying the novelty of swimming in a magic bubble. Grover was kneeling at Zeus' throne, as if he'd just been giving a report, but when he saw them, he cried, "You made it!" He started to run towards Percy. Then he remembered he was turning his back on Zeus and looked for permission. "Go on," Zeus said, but he wasn't really paying attention to Grover. The Lord of Sky was staring intently at Talia. Grover trotted over. None of the gods spoke. Every clop of Grover's hooves echoed on the marble floor. Bessie splashed in his bubble of water. The hearth fire crackled. Draco studied the gods meanwhile. Zeus was imposing and very muscular, with shoulder-length black hair and gray/black neatly trimmed beard. Like Talia, he had electric blue eyes. He wore a dark blue pinstriped suit. Poseidon was dressed with beach shorts, a Hawaiian shirt, and sandals. He had a weathered, suntanned face with a dark beard and deep green eyes. Next to Poseidon was a huge lump of a man with a leg and a steel brace, misshapen head, and a wild brown beard, fire flickering through his whiskers. The Lord of Forges, Hephaestus. Hermes was at his side. He was wearing business suit, checking messages on his caduceus mobile phone. Apollo leaned back in his golden throne with the shades on. He had iPod headphones on. Dionysus looked bored, twirling a grapevine between his fingers. And Ares, well, he sat on his chrome and leather throne. On the other side of Zeus was his wife, Hera. She was, without a doubt, the second most beautiful goddess, only second to Aphrodite. She has long black hair, large, soft brown eyes that one could get lost in, and a face of regal and unapproachable beauty like that of a supermodel. She wore a dress that shimmered with colors like peacock feathers. A dark-haired goddess in green robes sat next to Hera on a throne woven of apple tree branches. Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Next to her sat a beautiful gray-eyed woman in an elegant white dress. She could only be Annabeth's mother, Athena. Then there was Aphrodite, who smiled at Draco knowingly and gave him a seductive look. Artemis sat between Athena and Aphrodite. All the Olympians in one place. So much power in this room, it was a miracle the whole palace didn't blow apart. Grover gave every one of them big hugs. Then he grasped Percy's arms. Percy, Bessie, and I made it. But you have to convince them. They can't do it. Do what? Percy asked. Heroes, Artemis called. The goddess slid down from her throne and turned to human size. A young auburn-haired girl, perfectly at ease in the midst of the giant Olympians. She walked towards them, her silver robes shimmering. There was no emotion in her face. She seemed to walk in a column of moonlight. The council has been informed of your deeds, Artemis told them. They know that Mount Othrys is rising in the west. They know of Atlas' attempt for freedom and the gathering armies of Kronos. We have voted to act. There was some mumbling and shuffling among the gods, as if they weren't all happy with this plan, but nobody protested. At my lord Zeus' command, Artemis said, my brother Apollo and I shall hunt the most powerful monsters, seeking to strike them down before they can join the Titans' cause. Lady Athena shall personally check on the other Titans to make sure they do not escape their various prisons. Lord Poseidon has been given permission to unleash his full fury on the cruise ship Princess Andromeda and send it to the bottom of the sea. And as for you, my heroes, she turned to face the other immortals. These half-bloods and hunters have done Olympus a great service. Would any here deny that? She looked around at the assembled gods, meeting their faces individually. I gotta say, Apollo broke the silence. These kids did okay. He cleared his throat and began to recite, Heroes win laurels. Yes, first class, Hermes interrupted, like he was anxious to avoid Apollo's poetry. All in favor of not disintegrating them? A few tentative hands went up. Demeter, Aphrodite. Wait just a minute, Ares growled. He pointed at Talia and Percy. These two are dangerous. It'd be much safer while we've got them here. Ares, Poseidon interrupted. They are worthy heroes. We will not blast my son to bits. Nor my daughter, Zeus grumbled. She has done well. Talia blushed. She studied the floor. It seemed she hardly got a compliment from her father. The goddess Athena cleared her throat and sat forward. I am proud of my daughter as well. But there is a security risk here with the other two. Mother, Annabeth said. How can you? Athena cut her off with a calm but firm look. It is unfortunate that my father, Zeus, and my uncle, Poseidon, chose to break their oath no to have more children. Only Hades kept his word, a fact that I find ironic. As we know from the great prophecy, children of the three elder gods, such as Talia and Percy, are dangerous. As thick-headed as he is, Ares has a point, right? Ares said, Hey, wait a minute. Who you, Callan? He started to get up, but a grape wind grew around his waist like a seat belt and pulled him back down. Oh, please. Ares, Dionysus sighed. Save the fighting for later. Ares cursed and ripped away the vine. You want to talk, you old drunk. You seriously want to protect these brats? Dionysus gazed down at them wearily. I have no love for them. Athena, do you truly think it's safest to destroy them? I do not pass judgment, Athena said. I only point out the risk. What we do, the council must decide. I will not have them punished. Not when one of the two is my own hunter, Artemis said. I will have them rewarded. If we destroy the heroes who do us a great favor, then we are no better than the Titans. If this is Olympian justice, I will have none of it. Calm down, sis, Apollo said. Geez, you need to lighten up? Don't call me sis. I will reward them. The gods were discussing like the group of the mission doesn't exist or doesn't have their own word. But there was someone whose status was at par with the gods. I think that all of you have to calm down, Draco said with a smirk. Do you really think that you can do as you want while I'm here? Draco wasn't afraid of the gods, not a bit. And there was a reason for that. Of all the gods here, only Zeus and Poseidon were problematic for him. The rest, most of them didn't have the DMG to harm Draco. And there was a reason for that. The system. Draco's abilities were broken, literally. He had two abilities that make him one of the strongest powerhouses on DxD right now. The first one, Aegis. The divine scales protect his skin of every attack that is weaker than his defense. In other words, if they didn't have the power to surpass Draco defense numeric value, then they couldn't harm him in any way. The second one, branch destruction and Tuki. This two were like only one skill, since they did the same. They boost Draco's stats a lot. What was more fearsome of Draco was his noble phantasm, but at the same level was these skills combined. Aegis plus the 2 stats booster turns Draco into an almost impenetrable defense for most of the beings in the world. There was another thing that makes Draco incredibly strong. Before, Draco was worried because he could only use his noble phantasm in his human form. But now, he has a noble phantasm that he could also use in his most powerful and real form, the dragon. With a numerical value of 9,120 in endurance once he uses all of his boosters, Draco could only harmed by 6 gods here. They were Zeus, Poseidon, Aphrodite, Ares, Apollo, and Artemis. Hephaestus, Hermes, Demeter, Hera, Dionysus, and Athena didn't have enough stats to harm Draco. Maybe if they used some special weapon, they could do something to him, but it doesn't seem that they have it with them right now. Even if the other 6 gods could actually harm Draco, more than 80% of their damage is going to be neglected. Ares' attacks are barely going to cause 1% of what they should do. The most troublesome are Zeus with his lightning bolt and Poseidon with his trident. Those 2 god-tier weapons, maybe even at the top 5 or top 10 weapons in the world, were going to do high damage to Draco. But still, Draco had the huge amount of 570,000 of HP points, with a HP regen of 8,550 per second. Alone, Draco could have a good fight with those 6 gods without the use of his noble phantasms. Yes, without the use of the noble phantasms. If Draco uses his sword, Leviathan, the gods can do little against him. That is because the sword is a god slayer. The higher the divinity of Draco's target, more damage the sword is going to deal. And who has a higher divinity than the Olympians? In other words, these guys in front of him were huge experience points for Draco. Maybe killing them he can evolve 1 or 2 times. What are you trying to say? Zeus asked calmly, although Draco could see his eyebrow twitching. Do you have comprehension problems? Draco replied with a rhetoric question. I'm saying that I'm not going to let you kill them. And who are you to decide for us? Ar growled. The one who can kill you before you can feel it. The whole place turned silence. I killed Ladon alone, the evil dragon. Now I'm much stronger than before, and my weapon, Draco summoned Leviathan on its small form, is your nemesis. The gods took a step back when they felt that aura. Anti-divine. Anti-life. That sword reminded the oldest ones of Kronos' sword, but this one was much deadlier. Draco, please calm yourself. Artemis intercede. We are not your enemies. Not for now, I hope. Draco nodded. But that can be changed based on your decisions. You surely don't want to be my enemy. Not right now. Indeed, Poseidon nodded. We don't want to be your enemies, as well as I don't want to see my son dead. There is no more discussion. Who wants to kill my son, you can go and fight the new Great Dragon King. I haven't seen such an intimidating aura from a Great Dragon King since the last time Tiamat created a havoc in my territory, Zeus said. For once, I agree with Poseidon. Ares scowled. His hatred towards Percy was so big that he wanted to kill him personally. However, now he also wanted to kill Draco as bad as he wants to kill the half-blood. But he couldn't kill either of the two, or he was going to be the one dead. If killing those potential dangers is going to come with an even greater danger, it's obvious to say that it's not worth, Athena said. Nor when Kronos is coming back to life. Draco nodded, seeing that the only 2 gods that wanted to end Talia and Percy's lives were now retreating. It was a pity, since he thought that the gods were going to be more temperamental. He was a little disappointed in that regard. But to think that now Draco could go against Olympus alone. He has grown a lot since the idiot that came to this world alone more than 2 years ago. Still, Draco couldn't go against the Greek pantheon alone. There were more gods stronger than the ones here there. And he knew it. The strongest god of this pantheon, Hades, wasn't here. Hades is a god that could scare Zeus. How strong is he? One of the 10 strongest beings in the world. How many experience points is he going to give? Well, Zeus grumbled. Maybe he was a little bit annoyed right now. But the beast must be destroyed. We have agreement on that, Now there were a lot of nodding heads. They were obviously talking about Bessie. Bessie? You want to destroy Bessie? Percy shouted. Mo! Bessie protested. Poseidon frowned. You have named the Ophiuchus Bessie? Dad, Percy said, he's just a sea creature. A really nice sea creature. You can't destroy him. Poseidon shifted uncomfortably. Percy, the monster's power is considerable. If the Titans were to steal it, or... You can't, Percy insisted. Percy looked at Zeus. Controlling the prophecies never works. Isn't that true? Besides, Bess, the Ophiuchus is innocent. Killing something like that is wrong. It's just as wrong as Kronos eating his children just because of something they might do. It's wrong. Zeus seemed to consider this. His eyes drifted to his daughter Talia. And what are the risks? Kronos know full well. If one of you were to sacrifice the beast's entrails, you would have the power to destroy us. Do you think we can let that possibility remain? You have to trust them, Annabeth spoke up. Sir, you have to trust them. Zeus scowled. Trust a hero? Annabeth is right, Artemis said. Which is why I must first make a reward. My faithful companion, Zoe Nightshade, is no longer a hunter. I must have new lieutenant, and I intend to choose two. I shall have 2 new lieutenants, she announced. If they will accept it. Talia, Bianca, Artemis said. Will you lead the hunt? Silence filled the room. Talia looked calm, while Bianca was shocked. I will, Talia said firmly. I will, Bianca said awkwardly. Now, Artemis said, I can't withstand one of my hunters to don't be recognized by her godly parent. Bianca deserves who is her dad. Zeus mumbled. About that, okay. All of the gods allowed have their attention here at the moment. Even my eldest brother and her wife. So, who is the father of this child? It wasn't a question. Draco could feel it. It was an order from the king of gods. One moment of silence, and something started to gloat on Bianca's head. Gasp! The gods looked surprised. Zeus even had a terrible dark face right now. Up from Bianca's head was a helm giving off a dark aura. The helm of darkness, Poseidon muttered. Hades, Zeus growled. Bianca was surprised. No, all of them were surprised. Even Draco was. So not even Hades kept his promise, Athena muttered. No, Talia said. This girl born before the prophecy. Zeus seemed to recall something. What is your surname, girl? D'Angelo, sir. So, you were the kid back then. Huh, Zeus muttered. What a mistake I made. He looked at the sky, and then looked back towards Bianca. I can assume that your little brother is also alive, right? Bianca nodded. All of the gods' face turned grim. If there was one demigod that could turn down Olympus, that would be a son of Hades. Nico is still too young, Artemis said. He is only 10 or 11. There are still 5 or 6 years before he reached 16. 6 years for Kronos to deceive him, Athena said. Much can change in 6 years, my dear sister. We should be better keeping an eye on Perseus, Artemis replied. There is only 2 years until he reaches 16. I know that. I was only pointing potential risks. I'm going to take care of that boy, Draco said. The gods looked back at the dragon. We cannot have someone so dangerous to us in the hands of an outsider, Zeus said. Lord Zeus, he is not an outsider. Artemis took a step front. He is one of my hunters, and I trust him. I have to say that I prefer the boy being with the dragon rather than with Kronos, Athena said. Still, we can't let him get out of our sight, Zeus denied. An idea passed through Draco's head. We can do it like this, Draco explained. There are still 2 years before Percy turns 16. How about you let Nico come with me these 2 years, and I will return him back to you if Percy is not the chosen one. The gods turned silent again. They were thinking carefully about this idea of Draco. Even before the gods could talk, someone took the courage to do it. Please, I beg you, don't kill my little brother. It was Bianca. Draco has been seeing how she was trembling all this time. They talked about her little brother like he was a threat to Olympus when he was only a little kid who loves playing a card game. Let's start voting, Zeus said. Who is in favor of letting Hades' child go with Draco? Some hands were raised. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 hands were raised. Artemis, Apollo, Aphrodite, Hera, Demeter, Athena, Hephaestus and Hermes. The ones who didn't vote were Ares, Dionysus, Poseidon, and Zeus. It is decided then, Zeus said. You can have Nico D'Angelo. But where are you going to be? Why should I tell you? Even if you're going to take the kid under your custody, we need to know more or less. Where is his location? Japan, Draco said. He wasn't going to tell anything more. Anyways, Artemis already know where he lived. Zeus nodded. Now about the Ophiuchus. This boy is still dangerous, Dionysus warned. The beast is temptation of great power, even if we spare the boys. No, Percy said. Please, keep the Ophiuchus safe. My dad can hide him under the sea somewhere, or keep him in an aquarium here, in Olympus. But you have to protect him. And why should we trust you? Rumbled Hephaestus. Poseidon stood. I will not have a sea creature destroyed if I can help it. And I can help it. He held out his hand, and a trident appeared in it. A 20-foot-long bronze shaft with 3 spear tips that shimmered with blue, watery light. I will vouch for the boy and the safety of the Ophiuchus. You won't take it under the sea. Zeus stood suddenly. I won't have that kind of bargain ship in your possession. Brother, please, Poseidon sighed. Zeus' lightning bolt appeared in his hand, a shaft of electricity that filled the whole room with ozone smell. Those were the 2 divine weapons that Draco was wary of. Just like he thought, they were really powerful. They were at the level of a strong, noble phantasm, maybe at the strongest noble phantasm, or even greater. Fine, Poseidon said. I will build an aquarium for the creature here. Hephaestus can help me. The creature will be safe. We shall protect it with all our powers. The boy will not betray us. I vouch for this on my honor. Zeus thought about this. All in favor? A lot of hands went up. Dionysus abstained, along with Ares and Athena. But everybody else? We have a majority, Zeus decreed. And so, since we will not be destroying these heroes, I imagine we should honor them. Let the triumph celebration begins. There are parties, and then there are huge, major blowout parties. And then there are Olympian parties. If you ever got a choice, go for the Olympian. The 9 muses cranked up the tunes, and Draco realized the music was whatever you wanted it to be. The gods could listen to classical, and the younger demigods heard hip-hop or whatever, and it was all the same soundtrack. No arguments. No fights to change the radio station. Just requests to crank it up. Dionysus went around growing refreshment stands out of the ground. A beautiful woman walked with him arm in arm, his wife, Ariadne. Dionysus looked happy for the first time. Nectar and ambrosia overflowed from golden fountains, and platters of mortal snack food crowded the banquet tables. Golden goblets filled with whatever drink you wanted. Grover trotted around with a full plate of tin cans and enchiladas. His goblet was full of double espresso latte, which he kept muttering over like an incantation. Pan, Pan. Gods kept coming over to congratulate Draco for his promotion to Great Dragon King. Thankfully, they had reduced themselves to human size, so they didn't accidentally trample partygoers under their feet. Hermes started chatting with him, but he got a call on his caduceus and walked away. Apollo told Draco that he could drive his sun chariot any time, and if he ever wanted archery lessons. Thanks, Draco told him. But seriously, I don't need your help with archery. Nonsense, he said. Target practice from the chariot as we fly over the U.S. Best fun there is. Sure, Draco said. Let's talk about it another day. Draco moved through the crowds that were dancing in the palace courtyards. He didn't have anything special to do, so he was just observing through the party. He gave permission to Zoe to do as she wanted during the party. She probably was with Talia, Bianca, and Artemis. Percy was talking with his father, and Draco couldn't see that other demigod girl, Annabeth. Draco caught a sweet smell, and a pair of arms hugged him from behind. 2 large pompous circles rested on his back, 2 fairly large tits. What do you want, Aphrodite? Draco asked. Don't be so harsh, dragon, the goddess of love said, still embracing him from behind. I couldn't resist myself from hugging you, you know? It was really difficult to withstand these urges back in the throne room. Your smell, your body, your nerves, all about you is so damn hot. Your husband and your lover are here, you know? Draco said. I think that you are the one with big nerves. Those 2? Pa, she spat. Those two are two big fools. They are so boring. No one of them has the nerves to raise his hand against those two brothers or the rest of the council. But you sigh. You are so brave. Stop it already. Draco separated himself from Aphrodite. Are you scared of those fools, Draco? She asked with a smile. I'm not scared, just wary, Draco said. But not of them. I'm wary of you, the goddess of love. You are the only terrifying god here. Aphrodite put the finger on her seductive lips. Then, she approached Draco and hugged his arm. You're talking about the power of love? Huh? Yeah, it's powerful. Really powerful. But, don't you want this power for yourself? Draco frowned. What do you mean? As long as you can give me what I want, I'll do whatever it takes to help you, she said as she held her mouth to Draco's ear. Aphrodite blew, causing Draco to shiver a little. The power of love, I will lend it to you. You can do what you want with me. You can make me do what you want. What do you want? Draco asked. This offer was very tempting, extremely tempting. The power of Aphrodite. Draco could make good use of it. Life in Olympus has become very boring. Nothing is happening lately. The arrival of Kronos is the most interesting thing in many years. However, that's not the entertainment I'm looking for. She kissed his cheek and ran her hand across his chest. What I seek is the most interesting love story, and you can give it to me. Draco sighed. He understood what she was trying to say. They had had a similar conversation a few days earlier. What an interesting and classic story of the hero overcoming hardships, defeating the wicked and taking on beauties. The goddess got excited by herself as she spoke. It was obvious from the blush on her face that there was no shame in it. Beauties of all kinds, even those who have sworn to love no man. I have understood you. Draco sighed. Then, in a surprise move for the goddess, he grabbed her voluptuous breasts. So why don't I start capturing these beauties? The goddess opened her eyes in surprise but then smiled. Yes, you can start. But let me give you my blessing first. Aphrodite looked at Draco, and then she sealed her lips with his. Let's get out of here, said Aphrodite. Being in the middle of the party, they could not vent their emotions in this place. Aphrodite took Draco's hand and dragged him out of the party. Where are we going? Asked Draco. To a place where we won't be disturbed. She smiled seductively. To my chambers. She must have used some kind of magic to hide the presence of both of them, since no one noticed that they had left. Indeed, the goddess of love could do that because of her high level of magic. As they walked, Draco was examining what he had just obtained. The boost in magic was minimal, just 100 extra points. Still, it was something that was appreciated. Who knows how many levels Draco had to level up to get another 100 points. The magic resistance upgrade was also something that was very much appreciated, especially now that Draco had decided it was a good time to go to Nereus. The casters were always servants that one had to be careful of. Not only that, as Saber, Artoria, had a high degree of magical power, and several other servants used magic in their attacks. Now, Draco looked at the two skills he had gained from the blessing. Endless stamina. You don't know tiredness, you always have energy in your body. Fighting, running, sex. No matter what the activity, you can always go for one more round. Knowing that this skill comes from Aphrodite, Draco is not wrong in thinking that this is 100% directed to sex. At least he could use it for combat. Charm. This skill was very obvious, but equally, Draco wanted to know the specifications of this one. The ability to charm people from the opposite gender. The better your magic power, the more chances you get of charming girls. This skill can be useful, but it wasn't one that Draco liked. Draco was most likely never going to use this ability. This skill was for people who didn't have confidence in seducing or charming anyone. As Draco watched his new skills, they finally arrived at Aphrodite's quarters. It was a palace only a little smaller in size than the throne room where they had been before. The palace itself exuded a seductive and loving aura, so it didn't take much thought to realize that this was Aphrodite's personal property on Olympus. Walking down a long corridor, Aphrodite pushed Draco into a room. Draco was paralyzed for a moment as he breathed in the scent of her. Without a doubt, the room was filled with potent aphrodisiacs, as Draco felt warm at once. As with Ladon's poison, Draco's poison resistance was not enough to defend against such a powerful aphrodisiac. Basically, Draco was in the place where Aphrodite was most powerful, and he had a tough battle to fight with her. Yufufu. Draco heard a little laugh coming from his back. You seem to have figured out where you've gotten to. Be careful. I'm not as easy to defeat as this Nekashu of yours. Draco turned around, only to see that Aphrodite had already taken off her white dress. She was impressive. Her face, her body, her everything was the most beautiful thing one could see in her life. Yes, although Draco wanted to deny it, Aphrodite's appearance was several leagues above any other woman he had seen or will see. She was incredibly beautiful when she was wearing clothes. However, she was even better when she was naked. Her large breasts were perfectly shaped despite their size, with a mole between them made Draco's gaze fixed on them. Going down, her stomach was flat, but she didn't lose her attractiveness to any other part of her body. Her long, slender legs guided Draco to her pussy, free of pubic hair. If Draco was already hot with the aphrodisiac, he was now completely erect. With a wave of her hand, Aphrodite made Draco's clothes disappear. Well, they didn't disappear, but were removed using magic and appeared on a chair in another part of the room. Aphrodite seemed surprised to see Draco's cock. I must say, with my vast experience, yours is one of the biggest cocks I have ever seen. Draco gave a complicated smile. I don't know how I should take that. The problem is not the size, the goddess said. I can adjust my pussy to any size dick, so I can feel maximum pleasure. The problem is whether or not you know how to use your weapon. It can cost you a defeat, you know? Draco became serious. Aphrodite had just challenged him, and he took the challenges very seriously. Aphrodite slowly approached him and put a hand on his chest. She put some pressure on it, and they both fell on the bed. Draco had his back supported on the bed, and Aphrodite's tits attached to his chest. The goddess's face was only a few inches away from the dragon's. Both knew what was going to happen next. Neither of them was a child. They both moved their faces at the same time, and their lips stuck together. They kissed passionately, like two lovers who hadn't been together for a long time. They intertwined their tongues and drank their saliva. Draco had never felt a kiss like that. He felt as if Aphrodite's tongue was absorbing him. But he was already prepared for this. While they were both absorbed in the kiss, Draco turned around. With Aphrodite beneath him a little surprised, Draco continued the kiss as his hands moved over the goddess' body. Draco squeezed the goddess' big tits and played with her nipples. The goddess let out moans drowned out by the kiss for pleasure. As a goddess of lust, she was extremely sensitive. On his way to her pussy, he reached down with one hand and was surprised when he noticed the spring that was coming out of her flesh hole. Draco broke the kiss and looked into the goddess' eyes. She was looking at him with playful eyes. A fufu. I'm the goddess of sex. I don't need foreplay to get my pussy wet, she mumbled. But I appreciate it. Few people understand that this is an essential part of sex. Is that so? Draco lowered his head to her chest and bit her nipple. Aphrodite moaned with pleasure. With his hand in her pussy, Draco stuck a finger inside the goddess. Immediately, Draco felt all the pressure of her falling on the finger. The goddess hole of flesh squeezed Draco's finger to the max. Yes, God. Aphrodite's body was made to feel the greatest possible pleasure. If it was a finger that went into her pussy, her body would move to try and get as much pleasure from it as possible. But the pleasure that Aphrodite's body can give her is limited. In the end, sex was a thing of two, not one. Without Draco's support, sticking your finger inside the pussy would be no different than sticking a dildo in and leaving it inside. But Draco hadn't gone through all that training with Kuroko for nothing. Skillfully, he sought out the goddess's most sensitive spots inside her pussy. But, amidst Aphrodite's moans, he realized that her entire cunt was extremely sensitive. This caused Draco to stop temporarily. Don't stop. Aphrodite complained amid sighs. This made Draco snap out of it. Draco continued. Although Aphrodite was a goddess, she was still a woman. There was no way she didn't have her own weaknesses, just to find them. Aphuel? Very well. Draco stuck another finger inside Aphrodite. The more brothers and sisters who help in the search, the better. At the same time, he increased the speed with which he played with Aphrodite's interiors. Oh ah! Involuntarily, the goddess raised her hips when Draco played in a certain place. Yes, it seemed that he had finally found a little weakness in her. It was small, but something is something. Memorizing it, Draco began to attack that place with more intensity and speed than before. Yeah, harder, faster. Give me more. The goddess had no restrictions. She was really enjoying it to the fullest. Oh, looks like you're close now, Draco whispered in her ear. He bit into Aphrodite's earlobe and stuck a third finger in. Aphrodite opened her eyes wide, and her pupils contracted, as did her insides. The amount of love juices spilling out increased rapidly, and Draco began to feel the tension in his fingers. It's coming! Draco increased his speed. It's coming! Aeon! It's coming! Aphrodite kept moaning like crazy. Her back was bending, and she was unconsciously moving her crotch towards Draco's fingers. Draco blew hot air into her ear. What's coming? This caused Aphrodite to pause for a second, and her body began to shake like crazy. I'm coming! Coming! The squirt shot out. Draco could have sworn he saw it touching the ceiling. After she squirts, Aphrodite dropped onto the bed. Draco let her rest and took a step back, getting ready for what was to come. Hey, Aphrodite called to him, and she made a very striking gesture. Aren't you going to put it in? She was opening her pussy with her own hands, inviting him in. Since Aphrodite was inviting him, Draco had no intention of turning her down. Draco got into position. Without even a warning, his member penetrated Aphrodite's cave. She gasped in surprise, not waiting for Draco to put it all in her body. Draco's 28 centimeters, which had grown even more after his evolution, reached Aphrodite's vagina's bottom. All the folds of Aphrodite's pussy contracted around Draco's cock, making him moan with pleasure. Just as the goddess had said before, her pussy always fit her male partner perfectly. Still, the goddess had just run a few seconds earlier. As much as she was the goddess of sex, she was still a woman and had physical limitations. Her body, which was still recovering from the previous orgasm, trembled slightly. Draco smirked when he saw this and began to push. Moving his waist up and down, Draco smashed his balls into her hole. Aphrodite was much more than wet, so Draco's dick went in easily. It went through her lower lips and hit her uterus hard. Ugh! Aphrodite let out a soft moan of pleasure. She grabbed the sheets tightly as Draco penetrated her at will. Why yes, like that, give me more? Sure. Draco smiled, and he started thrusting faster. Aphrodite gasped deeply and groaned in pleasure. Draco bent over and licked the goddess' neck, her armpit, and finally bit her nipples. With one hand, he held her arms above her head firmly, while with the other, he caressed her abdomen and legs. Finally, his hands moved towards her vulva. He used his fingers to rub the small lump that protruded from her pussy, the clitoris, making Aphrodite moan even more loudly. Then, as Aphrodite was getting used to the pleasure, Draco pinched her clitoris. Aphrodite groaned in pain. A pleasant chill ran through her body, and its walls tightened around Draco's dick. She did not expect this move from Draco, who was used to being treated like a queen by all her sexual partners. Instead, Draco was treating her like a toy, and that, she loved it. Draco took a deep breath when he felt the contractions around his dick. Damn, as expected from Aphrodite, she almost made him ejaculate with that surprise move. Draco resumed his attacks, leaving the marks of his teeth on her breasts and neck, biting and licking without mercy. It was painful and, at the same time, pleasant for Aphrodite. A different stimulus for her, who had always worshipped sex and love. As a goddess of love, she was one of those who thought casual sex was heresy. That's why she only had sex with men she loved. The problem was that she fell in love too easily. Draco! With a loud cry, Draco felt Aphrodite's first orgasm. Why yes! After the flood of love juices drenched his waist, Aphrodite gasped. She opened her eyes and panted heavily, while looking at him with an expectant gaze. She wanted more pleasure, more sex. With a mischievous smile, Draco licked her ear and bit her earlobe. I never would have thought the sex goddess would reach orgasm before I did, Draco whispered. Draco interrupted her. But don't worry, I'm going to do a lot more of this. Draco moved his stick again in the next moment, piercing the goddess' wet interiors. Double eight. I'm sorry I can't wait. He smirked and put strength on his waist. Suddenly, his penis pierced her deepest part. Aphrodite gasped, and her body shivered. She bit her lips until leaking a bit of golden blood, but her mouth let out a soft grunt even like that. Draco was surprised to see the golden blood and could not help but lick it. He immediately felt his dick swell a little more. Your blood has an aphrodisiac effect too, Draco complained as he continued to penetrate Aphrodite. Of course, although you should have fallen in love with me, she said between moans. Your resistance, magic, is greater than I thought. Draco didn't care about the effects of her blood. He brought his mouth to his shoulders and bit, drawing a little more golden blood. The bite caused the walls of Aphrodite to squeeze again, trying to squeeze Draco. So, he trusted hard while enjoying her tight cave. Aphrodite shuddered and quivered as her body spasmed due to the pleasure. She moaned and screamed loudly. Her body twisted below him, and her legs wrapped around his waist. He released her hands, and she instantly wrapped them around his neck. At the same time, she brought her mouth to his should and bit hard. Draco grunted and turned her over, putting her on all fours. It was time to change position and fuck her doggy style. Then, he pushed and shoved her into a doggy position. Aphrodite's moans became even louder and lewder. She was surely enjoying this. More love juices came out from her body. The bed was already drenched completely. Finally, when Draco felt she was about to orgasm again, he decided to end their lovemaking. Grabbing her waist, he moved in and out quickly. He slammed his waist on her ass while he used his teeth and tongue to bite and lick her back. Aphrodite's body shivered repeatedly, and her eyes turned blank. Draco. See deep, so rough, this is heaven. Her body spasmed. Once, twice, and thrice. Draco grunted. The attacks of his waist turned faster, and finally, he felt his orgasm coming. Thus, he thrust one last time and deposited his white-hot stuff inside her womb. Coming! Aphrodite screamed loudly and arched her back. Immediately after that, her body lost strength, and she collapsed in the bed. Draco took a deep breath and lay over her. Just when Draco thought this was the end, he found a pair of pink eyes looking at him. You really think this was enough? Aphrodite said. It's not. Draco smiled. I also want to continue, but I think that we have to end this here. Why? Because they are going to find us here, Draco said. Well, I don't care if they found us having sex. But do you want to deal with it? Aphrodite put on a pained face. It's even worse if my useless husband is the one to find us. Fine, let's end it here. But I want more of this. I hadn't enjoyed such good sex in millennials. Draco frowned, and Aphrodite saw that. What? You don't want to? We can repeat it, but only if you promise me one thing. Aphrodite nodded, asking what that promise was. Draco hugged her and sealed her lips. Be my one, only mine. If you want sex, come and find me. If you want to cuddle, come and find me. If you want to be loved, come and find me. But don't search for other men when you have me. If you can fulfill that promise, I can give you everything you want. My women deserve the world. Your women? Yes, I will do everything for my loyal women. Aphrodite thought about it a little. That's a difficult decision. Let me think about it for a couple of days, and I will give you my answer. Draco nodded while he got up from the bed. Okay, take your time. You can ask Artemis for my address. She knows it. Draco dressed up again and waved towards Aphrodite, who was still in the bed. Draco looked for Zoe through the crowd at the party. On the way, he found Percy dancing with Annabeth, although Athena didn't seem too happy about it. Finally, he found Zoe with Artemis and her two new lieutenants. How are you doing? Draco approached them friendly. Good, Artemis nodded. A party like all the others that take place on Olympus. You don't seem to enjoy it much. Artemis nodded. I am here only as a formality. I don't like these parties. I prefer to be hunting with my hunters. Draco nodded and looked at Talia and Bianca. Congratulations on your promotion. I guess you're my superiors. Bianca looked down at the floor with a flushed face. I don't dare call myself superior to you, Draco. I would have died several times on this mission, if not for your help. Bianca is right. You have done more than anyone else in the group, Talia said. We wouldn't have achieved anything without you. Draco shook his head. It's been a team effort. We couldn't have gotten rid of the skeletons without Bianca. It would have taken much longer to finish the mission if it weren't for the statues that Talia woke up. Even Percy and Grover played a big role at the time. What are you going to do now, Draco? Artemis asked. I'm going to camp Half-Blood to get Nico before anyone else does, Draco said. That's why I came here. He looked at Zoe. Are you coming with me? The hunter, who had been quiet until now, nodded her head. It's a temporary goodbye, my lady, Zoe said to Artemis. I hope to see you again. The goddess nodded her head. Enjoy this new opportunity. Zoe nodded with a trace of tears in her eyes. A few minutes later, Draco and Zoe were traveling on Golden Drive to Long Island. Compared to Mount Olympus, Manhattan was quiet. It was early in the morning, and hardly anyone was on Fifth Avenue. Draco deployed Golden Drive, and Zoe sat behind him. The Long Island Expressway was almost deserted. As they trudged back up Half-Blood Hill to the pine tree where the golden fleece glittered, Draco remembered Zeus's daughter. Right now, she was off with Artemis into their next adventure as one of the two lieutenants. Almost at the same time, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover were brought there. It was Argus, the many-eyed security chief, the one who picked them up. Chiron greeted them at the big house with hot chocolate and toasted cheese sandwiches. Grover went off with his satyr friends to spread the word about their strange encounter with Pan's magic. Within an hour, the satyrs ran around agitated, asking where the nearest espresso bar was. The rest of the group sat with Chiron and some of the other senior campers, Beckendorf, Silena Beauregard, and the Stoll brothers. There was a new woman that Draco didn't recognize. She was the leader from the Ares cabin, Clarice. Draco had a strange face while looking at Silena, as he just fucked her mother. Draco looked at Clarice curiously. She looked tired and dirty, especially on her short blonde hair. Well, it looked like someone had attacked it with a pair of safety scissors. I got news, she mumbled uneasily. Bad news? I'll fill you in later, Chiron said with forced cheerfulness. The important thing is you have prevailed. And you saved Annabeth. Yeah, but Luke is alive, Draco said. Annabeth sat up. How do you know? Draco couldn't say that he didn't receive any EXP point from him, right? I know when I kill someone, Draco explained. And he wasn't dead. I didn't have a good angle shot. Or I will have to hit Talia first before giving him a killing blow. Percy nodded. My father has said the same. The Princess Andromeda is still there in the seas. Well, Annabeth shifted uncomfortably in her chair. If the final battle does come when Percy is 16, at least we have 2 more years to figure something out. It's a waste of time, Draco said. Trying to save that kid, well, you can try if you want. But he is on my list of kill at sight. Why? Annabeth stared at Draco. He's a good boy. He was? Draco corrected her. He is no longer that childhood friend of yours, Annabeth. People change, he changed. Annabeth sat back with a pale face. It looked like she refused to believe that. Chiron's expression was gloomy. Sitting by the fire in his wheelchair, he looked really old. 2 years may seem like a long time, he said, but it is the blink of an eye. I still hope you are not the child of the prophecy, Percy. But if you are, then the Second Titan War is almost upon us. Kronos' first strike will be here. How do you know? Draco asked. Why would he care about the camp? Because the gods use heroes as their tools, Chiron said simply. Destroy the tools, and the gods will be crippled. Luke's forces will come here. Mortal, demigod, monstrous. We must be prepared. Clarice's news may give us a clue as to how they will attack. But there was a knock on the door, and Nico D'Angelo came huffing into the parlor, his cheeks bright red from the cold. He was smiling, but he looked around anxiously. Hey, where's my sister? Dead silence. Nobody has told him yet. And then he realized why. They'd been waiting for Draco to appear, to tell Nico in person. Hey, Nico, Draco got up from his chair. Your sister is perfectly okay. She is the new lieutenant of Artemis. Isn't that cool? But we have to talk about you, boy. Let's take a walk. He took the news in silence, and Draco didn't know what to think. Well, this is a present from your sister. Draco tried to make light of the situation. It might be a coincidence, but it's the figurine of Hades. Yes, Draco had explained Nico about his situation. He had to leave the United States and come to Japan with Draco, or his life might be endangered. He is possibly the child of the prophecy, and Kronos can make use of him. They were standing at the dining pavilion, just where they'd last spoken before Draco went on the quest. So, my life is in danger? Nico asked. Yes, there are several gods that want to kill you. So, now I have to join you in your mercenary organization, train, and fight the bad boys? He asked slowly. Draco nodded. Nico looked down for a moment. His fist was trembling. That's... Just when Draco thought that Nico was going to cry, the kid threw his fist to the air and jumped as high as he could. That's so cool. Before Draco could say anything, he heard a new sound behind him. A hissing, clattering noise he recognized all too well. Draco summoned his sword, and Nico gasped. Draco whirled and found himself facing 5 skeleton warriors, the survivors from the last fight. They grinned fleshless grins and advanced with swords drawn. Draco wasn't sure how they'd made it inside the camp, and it was more like they appear from nowhere. They're already trying to kill me, Nico screamed. What are these things? No, they aren't here for you. Or maybe they are. Maybe Kronos already know about Nico, which was his attempt to get him since the skeletons should follow Percy. Get behind me. They can't do anything to you while I'm here. The first skeleton charged, and Draco just pushed him aside. Then he sliced the other 4 with one movement, but they started to knit back together. Run, Nico! Draco yelled. Go search for a weapon. You're the only one who can kill them. As a son of Hades, Nico has the same powers as his sister. He should be able to kill these skeletons. But Nico just stayed there looking shocked. This was too much for the 10 years old. Draco could fight the 5 of them alone, but they slowly got closer to him and Nico. It was at that moment that Nico did something. No! Nico shouted. Go away! The ground rumbled beneath them. The skeletons froze. Draco rolled out of the way just as a crack opened at the feet of the 5 skeletons. The ground ripped apart like a snapping mouth. Flames erupted from the fissure, and the earth swallowed the skeletons in one loud crunch. Silence. In the place where the skeletons had stood, a 20-foot-long scar wove across the marble floor of the pavilion. Otherwise, there was no sign of the warriors. Draco whistled. As expected of the son of the strongest Greek god, you have potential. Nico looked at his hands and then looked at Draco with dread. They really want to kill me? Yes, they do. Draco nodded. It seems that Nico didn't really believe that they wanted to kill him. I don't want to depend on anyone, he said. Then, Nico looked at Draco with determination. Please, teach me to fight. Help me get stronger. You have successfully changed a person's fate. 1 fate point obtained. Draco couldn't smile wider. I will. Draco returned to the place Chiron was after leaving Nico with Zoe. The boy was uneasy when he saw the former hunter, but Draco explained a bit of the situation. At least, they weren't fighting. You really think the first attack will be here? Draco asked Chiron. Chiron stared at the hills. It will not be until summer at least, Chiron said. This winter will be hard. The hardest for many centuries. It makes sense they have to regain their strength, Draco said. Having Atlas in prison again is a huge blow for the Titans. It is, Chiron nodded. I doubt that Artemis could have killed him in that fight, and it probably would have been her the one dead. The right hand of Kronos, it's not a simple Titan. At that moment, Grover stumbled out of the big house, tripping over tin cans. His face was haggard and pale like he'd seen a specter. He spoke. Grover cried. Calm down, my young satyr, Chiron said, frowning. What is the matter? I was playing music in the parlor, he stammered. And drinking coffee. Lots and lots of coffee. And he spoke in my mind. Who? Pan. Grover wailed. The Lord of the Wild himself. I heard him. I have to find a suitcase. Wait. Draco said. What did he say? Grover stared at him. Just 3 words. He said, I await you. And this is the end of this volume. More than 40 chapters, by far the longest one. So, feel free to tell me your impressions. There were good fights, interesting ones, problems solved, and problems that are coming. There was a little of slice of life at the start of it, a little of lemon at the end of it. On my personal opinion, I enjoyed writing this volume. I had to put apart all about Slashdog and DxD because I was starting to get bored, but now I'm looking forward to write more than ever. The next volume, Fate, about Clarice bad news. Clarice is not at Camp Half-Blood because she is away on a secret scouting mission for Chiron, but has not been heard from and is considered MIA. After Clarice went on her quest in the labyrinth, Clarice stumbled upon Chris Rodriguez, who she had a crush on, who was driven to insanity by the ghost king Minos. She takes him back to Camp Half-Blood, determined to nurse him back to health. Once Annabeth is retrieved, Clarice tells the campers in Chiron that she has bad news for everyone. This bad news is that the Kronos army, Luke, is trying to use the labyrinth to get into Camp Half-Blood. I'm telling you this because I'm not planning to cover that book on this fanfic, although I can change my mind later. That same night, Draco took a plane with Zoe and Nico to Japan. Whoa, so this is a plane? Nico was terribly excited. Sitting in a row of 3, Draco was in the middle of the other 2. Unlike on the outbound trip, Zoe was not as uncomfortable with Draco. The trip was not as relaxed as either of them would have liked. Young Nico slept peacefully because he could not understand the danger this plane ride was to them. The heavens were Zeus territory. A single lightning strike from him was enough to kill Nico and damage Draco and Zoe. Are we in Japan? Nico asked. Yes, Draco nodded. In the end, Zeus decided not to kill Nico. Maybe the god wanted to keep his promise, or perhaps he was afraid of making Draco his enemy. Whatever the reason, everyone had survived that journey. Leaving the airport, Draco called a cab. Draco, tell me more about your organization. Nico seemed to be full of energy. Once the scare of the previous night had passed, he seemed to be back to normal. Let's see, her name is Akkad. Dawn. The name of the organization is Dawn. To make it simple, we take care of defeating the bad guys who are not easy to defeat. Nico nodded sharply. He seemed to be pointing out all the information in his head. Although in reality, the vast majority of Dawn's members are like you, guys with powers, but without fully developing their potential. If we add Zoe, I think we're just 6 really strong people. Draco, Kuroka, Mordred, Zoe, Valina, and Lavinia were the only ones who knew how to fight. In other words, they were powerful who could lead a mission or perform individual missions. Tobio, Natsum, Chiron, or Cookie were next in terms of power or experience. But they were still too immature. Tobio's case is even more special because he could end up being consumed by his own power. Are you going to teach me personally? Nico asked. His eyes were full of hope. However, Draco shook his head. I have an agreement with Azazel, the leader of the fallen angels. You will go with the rest of your new comrades to a special institute for people like you, where you will be taught your skills and the knowledge to survive in this supernatural world. As much as the Greeks find it hard to admit, there is much more to the supernatural world than their pantheon. Nico seemed a little disappointed, but soon took encouragement. You're talking about Azazel, that fallen angel in the Bible? Draco nodded. Nico let out another whoa of surprise. There was a smile on his face that seemed impossible to wipe off. You'll be surprised when you meet your new companions, Draco said. There are different races you've never seen before. Draco was a dragon, Valerie was a vampire, Zoe was an Hesperid, Aquino was a fallen angel hybrid, Kuroka and Chiron were hybrids of humans and Nicomeda, and Valina was a hybrid of human and devil. Together with the demigod Nico, it made Dawn an organization with an interesting number of races. The rest of the trip was spent in silence. Everyone was quite tired after all that had happened these last few days. Both Zoe and Draco had been on the verge of death, and that was quite a psychological burden. By the time they got home, it was already noon. Draco paid the cab driver all the money for the trip, and everyone got out of the car. Well, we're home now. In front of them were 2 large buildings. On the left was an apartment building, and on the right was a large house with many floors. Zoe and Nico followed Draco to the house on the right. However, something happened when they had just finished crossing the street. Draco and the house's door opened, and they only saw the figure of a girl before Draco ended up lying on the floor. When Zoe and Nico reacted again, they found a girl sitting on Draco's waist as she hugged him tightly. "Are those cattails?" asked an astonished Nico. Indeed, the person who had come out to meet them had been Kuroka. She had felt Draco's presence as soon as the cab arrived. Without caring about anything else, she had left everything she was doing to run to her beloved. "I missed you, said Kuroka as she kissed Draco's face repeatedly. Draco only smiled as he wrapped his arms around her back. "Hey, I've only been gone for a week," Draco said. "For me, that's the same as an eternity, Silly." For Nico's shock, and not so much Zoe's, Draco sealed Kuroka's lips. When it seemed that the Nekashu had calmed down a bit, Draco released her. Kuroka exhaled as her face blushed. Draco helped Kuroka up, and he introduced her to the two new additions. "Well, this here is Kuroka, my girlfriend," Draco said. "And these here are Nico, son of Hades, and Zoe, my new servant." Kuroka's eyes opened with surprise. She examined Nico from top to bottom as she said, "So this is what a son of Hades looks like. I imagined it differently." Nico was a little embarrassed to see how Kuroka was examining him without hesitation. Kuroka left Nico aside when she saw that he was not so impressive. She expected to see some part of a skeleton or something in him, but it seemed that the boy was quite normal. Instead, she became more interested in Zoe. "Oh, you're the girl from the other day. I'm surprised, of all the people I've met, you're the one I least expected to become my new partner." Kuroka was sincere. Artemis Lieutenant, someone who had accompanied her for millennia, was not someone she expected to be the new servant. "Several things happened in this last week," Zoe said as she looked at Draco. "I'm grateful for this new opportunity Draco has given me, although I'm still a little reluctant to part with Artemis. If anything, I look forward to working with you." "So do I," Nico added. Kuroka smiled as she nodded. "Welcome. We greet you with open arms." At that moment, the door of the house opened again. "Kuroka-ne-sama, why did you run away?" The voice of a young girl was heard. "Wait, this presence?" "Draco-ne-sama." Once again, the footsteps of a person running were heard, and another body fell on top of Draco. "Another girl with cattails?" Nico shouted in surprise. "Long time no see, Chiron." Unlike Kuroka, Chiron had very low statistics at the moment. That's why even if Draco wasn't paying attention, he had caught her with his arms. The younger Nekashu wrapped her entire body around Draco's torso and buried her head in Draco's chest. "Are the others inside?" Draco asked. Kuroka nodded. "Yes, they have all come from their training." When Draco entered the house, he was greeted by the girls who were waiting inside. Nico and Zoe watched in amazement as many girls pounced on Draco. Besides, they were not ordinary girls, but real beauties. A blonde girl with light eyes and huge tits, another girl with big tits but brown hair and a kind of bow, a girl a little older than Nico with silver hair, and another girl the same age as the previous one with black hair and purple eyes. The four girls had pounced on Draco and were crushing him. There were more girls, who for some reason had not run in Draco's direction, but you could see that they were happy with their arrival. They were two blonde girls about the same size. From her experience, Zoe could tell that one of them was a vampire, while the other she recognized as one of Draco's servants. Draco introduced Nico and Zoe to the rest, and vice versa. As a result, both parties were surprised. Zoe had met several users of Longinus during her life, but they were barely a dozen. That's why she found it hard to believe that 3 Longinus had met here, and she was even more shocked when she was told that there were 2 more Longinus in the other building. Then there were the 2 Nekashu, a species that was considered extinct. Even one of the Longinus users was the descendant of the original Mal Lucifer. Then there were the holders of the 4 fiends, although only one of them was here. Apparently, the girls who had a close relationship with Draco were the ones who lived in this building, while the rest of the members lived in the apartment building. The girls were also surprised to discover the identity of the 2 newcomers, although they were already used to receiving different people. although they were still attracted by the daughter of a Titan and the son of one of the three great gods of Greece. After eating the food that Lavinia and Bessie had worked so hard to prepare, they didn't want Draco to cook the first day back from a mission. Draco took Nico to his new home. Draco introduced Issei to Nico and informed them that they were going to start living together. The two were the youngest boys in the apartment building, so they had to learn to live together. Since Draco couldn't really trust the two brats, he asked E and Tobio, the two most responsible ones in the apartment building, to take a look at the two of them from time to time. They had no problem, as they had already been visiting Issei on their own. Draco also asked Tobio to go to Grigori to prepare a uniform for Nico, who was to join the training group from the next day on. Talking to Tobio, Draco asked about the situation of Koga and Shigyan. Apparently, Satinal's experiments on Koga had been dangerous and had shortened his lifespan a bit. Now, Azazel was seriously working on reversing those effects and achieving a safer transformation for the boy. By the way, Draco, Tobio called him before he left. Suzaka Himejima came the other day with a message for you. What is it? Draco asked. The head of the Uriya house, Uriya Nikiri, wants to talk with us about the problems that are happening in Japan in the last few months. Draco knew that he was referring to the Utsusimi conflict and the conflict in the forest, since those have been the main conflicts in the supernatural world in recent months. All right, I'll talk to Suzuka personally. I understand. Draco was personally interested in this Uriya boy. Unlike the boy who appeared in the DxDLN, this was the strongest Uriyu in history. Draco didn't really know what had happened to him and whether he had died or not. From what he understood, Uriya Nikiri had had some conflict with Vala Lucifer and Tobio Accuse, but he didn't know the reason for this conflict. Suppose history repeated itself, and this boy was as strong as he was said to be. In that case, he was going to give Draco a pretty significant amount of experience points. Draco said goodbye to Tobio and returned home. Kuroka had already shown Zoe the room she was going to sleep in, which was on the 3rd floor. The Nekashu had given her the option of sleeping with Draco along with all the girls, but the new archer had rejected that idea. That afternoon, Draco spent a lot of time with his girls. He hadn't seen them for a long time and missed them, and so did the girls. They put a bed in the main room and watched a movie together. A week had passed since Draco had returned from the United States. During that week, he had returned to the normalcy to which he was accustomed. In the mornings, he trained as he had always done, with the difference that now he could feel his improvements in Tuki, which had gone up a new level, and in Stealth, which had gone up another level. Now that he had greatly improved his stats, Draco could fight Mordred from time to time. His saber-class servant deeply appreciated this, as she longed to be able to have a good training fight once in a while. While Kuroka remained a lazy servant and seemed to do nothing during the day, she actually trained every day in her Senjutsu and Yujitsu. Though she had the noble phantasm Draco had given her, she did not want her original techniques to become useless. On Zoe's side, she had nothing to do during the day. That's why, when Draco told her about Nephilim, she volunteered to help Barrakiel train Dawn's members. Draco was worried about Nico, especially if the training was too hard for the boy. But there seemed to be no reason to worry. As Hades' son, Nico's physical abilities were far superior to those of an ordinary human. That's why he could keep up with Issei, even though he was still a long way from catching up with those who had been training for months like Tobio and Cookie. Draco continued to personally train Rainier. Fortunately, she had improved a lot since he started training her. In fact, she had already earned her 2nd pair of wings. However, Draco still hadn't earned the fate point from Rainier. If that was so, did that mean she was going to keep trying to take sacred gear from Asia? Maybe not, but she was going to end up dying at the hands of Rias Gremory anyway. Draco had to change that fate of Rainier, her untimely death at the beginning of the series. However, it seemed that this was not going to happen until she finally accepted herself. And Draco had already given up on getting this done through words or training. Right now, the only thing that could get Rainier to activate her latent abilities would be a starring event. A real-life or death situation where Rainier would have to give her all to survive. There was also the possibility of spending a fate point and turning her into a servant, but it wasn't worth turning Rainier into a servant. She had nothing special, as she was not much different from Aquino in terms of raw potential. and Draco had no intention of spending fate points on either of them. Even he had hesitated a bit to make Zoe his servant. Still, he had finally done it as it was a unique opportunity and Zoe was dying. Just as Draco could be assured that the servants he had created would be loyal to him, other servants from Naciverse were far better. And this was because they came with fate skill and noble phantasm, while the others did not. While Draco had to spend 3 fate points to turn Kuroka into a good servant, he only had to use 1 to get Mordred. I think you can understand what the most effective method is. And now that Draco had considerable strength and 3 servants, he had no reason to fear a rebellious servant. He could even gain plenty of experience points if that were the case. Currently, Draco was sitting quietly on the terrace of the building. That was where he trained his Tuki, but that was not the case at this time. Sage, I want you to talk to me about traveling between dimensions. That's a very broad term. I need you to specify what you want to know. Draco frowned. Let's start with the basics. Did you say a long time ago that it was going to cost me a fate point to open a portal to another dimension? That's right, it costs you 1 fate point per person. This is because you are artificially introducing an element that can change the fate of that universe. So, wouldn't it cost me more fate points to bring my servants with me? That's what Draco remembered. Sometime before, he had had a superficial conversation with Sage about a possible trip to Naciverse, specifically to the Holy Grail Wars. He had already told him that his servants could travel with him by spending a single fate point, but Draco could not understand why this was so. Sage answered Draco's question. No, this is because the servant's existence is linked to the system, while the system is linked to your soul. In other words, the laws of destiny of the multiverse treat the servants as if they were extensions of your soul. I see. Draco nodded. So the servants and Draco formed something like one and the same existence. It was strange, but that was how these transcendental laws worked. However, if I want to take someone other than my servant, then I will have to pay more fate points. Exactly. That was unfortunate. If it were possible, Draco would have liked to bring all the girls, and even the boys as well. Except for the youngest and weakest, Dawn's whole group was going to be very useful in the Holy Grail Wars. Sigh. It's a shame, Draco sighed. I would have liked to bring Valina and Lavinia, especially, as the power of both was going to be extremely useful. The power of 2 Longinus, especially 2 talented girls who knew how to use their powers, would not lose to a servant. No, together, they could even defeat 1 or 2 servants at the same time. Now, Draco had another problem. What is the relationship between the time in the Naciverse and this universe? Draco asked Sage. Yes, that was an important question. Draco had no doubt that by marching to Naciverse, he would be there for at least 10 years. The first trip to that universe Draco wanted to make was to the timeline of Kiritsugu Amiya and Shiro Amiya, the most famous of all. However, all this depended on the time he was going to spend in this DxD world. If time passed simultaneously in both universes, then Draco preferred to go to the Holy Grail War of Apocrypha. There is no temporal relationship between the 2 universes. What do you mean by that? Time will continue to pass in both universes, but you can decide what time you appear on the timeline. Of course, this has its own limits. Once you enter a universe, you cannot travel in time. That is, you can't go back into the DxD past, whereas you can reappear at any time in the future. Draco processed that information. More or less, travel between universes worked as follows. If Draco traveled to Naciverse, he could choose the time and place where he would appear. From that moment on, he could not go back in time. The same thing would happen when the time came for Draco and his servants to return to the DxD world. Draco could choose to return on a date later than the day he left for Naciverse, but he could not choose a date earlier than that. But, can I come back the same day? For example, 1 second later? Yes. Draco smiled. This was perfect for him. This was the best possible development for his situation. In this way, he could leave this universe without fear of losing any of the events that are going to happen in the future. Now Draco just had to have everything ready for the next trip. A few days later. Where did you say we were going? The one asking this question was a teenage girl with coppery skin, who had actually lived for millennia. She had a face full of shock, And this was because of what the boy in front of her had told her. Let's go to another universe. Draco repeated what he had said earlier. Hearing the same words again didn't make Zoe calm down. In fact, the effect was quite the opposite. Are you serious? She got up in alarm. Her reaction was normal. How could they travel to another universe? Did another universe even exist? Zoe was even rethinking whether Draco was or not mentally healthy. Perhaps the fight with Ladon had left him with more consequences than the boy normally displayed. But it only took one look at the other two servants who were accompanying them, who, though a little surprised, seemed to understand what Draco was saying. Although I understand your reaction, I think it's better to calm down for now, Zoe, Draco said. It's my fault I didn't explain it to you earlier, but that's why we're here. Seeing that both Draco and Mordred and Kuroko were calm, Zoe took a deep breath and sat down again. Perhaps it was best to hear what they had to say. So it's time? Huh. Mordred muttered as he clenched his fist. Are we going to the Corrupt Wars? At the question from his first servant, Draco nodded. I see. In the past, Draco told Mordred and Kuroko about Fuyuki's Holy Grail War and how it was contaminated by Ungramenyu. Well, he had only said details above, so the information they had was limited. Wait, Holy Grail War? Zoe didn't know anything about the Holy Grail War, just like anyone else in the world. Therefore, Draco had to explain to her as best he could what this war was all about. This also served as a refresher for Kuroko and Mordred, who may have forgotten details over the months. It wasn't too complicated either. A war between 7 masters and 7 servants who fought in the purest battle royale style until only one remained. Wait. Zoe stood up as she looked at Mordred with shock in her eyes. Are you the real Mordred? Mordred looked at her with some confusion. Yes, why? I am the sole heir to King Arthur. Zoe did not know exactly how to respond. She had always imagined that Mordred was one of those many descendants of heroes, but she would never have thought that he was the original hero. After finishing explaining the theory behind the Holy Grail War, Draco talked about these 2 specific Holy Grail Wars. We will arrive at the site in question a year early, as there is a certain event that I personally have to get involved in, Draco said. Therefore, we will have a year to adapt to the site and investigate if anything has changed from what I know. Now, Zoe had a face that said she was beginning to understand everything. When are we going to leave, Nya? Kuroko asked. Now, Draco said without hesitation. But first, we have to give Zoe a noble phantasm. Yes, Draco had to spend at least 1 fate point to give Zoe a noble phantasm. Hopefully, that noble phantasm was related to an archer. This, I know you've mentioned it before, the crystallization of a hero's fame or something like that, but how can you give me something like that? Zoe asked. Draco simply shrugged. The same way I made you into a servant. Kuroko is no different than you, and she already has her own noble phantasm. Meanwhile, Draco started talking to Sage. Spend 1 fate point on a noble phantasm. Are you sure? Yes.